What if Deku had rewind and Immortality Quirk? How would this change everything? Before we start, I want you guys to subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and also share this video with your friends. It will really mean a lot to me. You can also check other what ifs on the channel. The like aim for this video is 100. Your support keeps me motivated to bring more amazing what ifs for you guys. Now let's begin. Izuku opens his eyes, his chest heaving. He's on the field, staring up at the stage, and for a terrible moment, he thinks it's after the cavalry battle, after they lost, but when he blinks up at the stage, it's showing a countdown from 10 minutes, and the word short break in bright lettering. Izuku sighs a breath of relief before what just happened hits him. Izuku whips his head around, looking over the field to find Todoroki already watching him, face impassive, frustratingly so. Izuku stares back at him, and he's sure he looks stupid, wide-eyed and odd, but Todoroki just narrows his eyes. Izuku makes a quick decision, then, turning and walking towards the bathroom with determination in each step. He doesn't need to turn and check to know that Todoroki is following him. He can hear his footsteps, fast to catch up with Izuku, but Izuku doesn't look back. The way Izuku sees it, there are a few possibilities here. The first and arguably the worst is that Todoroki remembers everything that he remembers Izuku, sitting in a pool of his own blood, reaching up and telling him it'd be okay, that he remembers Izuku, dodging his attempts to help while Todoroki struggled to remember. Izuku doesn't think it's likely, though, because he'd seemed awfully confused, and also because Izuku doesn't get why Todoroki would remember, of all people. What was different? Was it my blood? The physical contact? The fact that I told him I'd be back? Izuku pushes open the door to the restroom, stopping in front of the sinks, and turning to face the door as Todoroki steps inside. Todoroki meets his eyes immediately, then winces, bringing a hand up to rest on the side of his head, squeezing his eyes shut for just a second before he looks back at Izuku. The broken faucet drips quietly in the background as Izuku tilts his head to the side and furrows his brows slightly, painting the perfect picture of confused concern. Todoroki, are you alright? Izuku watches, tries to see if Todoroki is showing signs of knowing, of remembering. Todoroki blinkies rapidly, then shakes his head, dropping his hand back to his side. I'm fine, he says, his eyes tracing the bathroom, looking around. They're alone, of course, and Izuku takes it as a good sign that Todoroki hasn't looked at his arms or spent any time staring at the last stall in particular. 10 million points, huh? Izuku says, giving Todoroki a small smile. It's gonna be tough for you in the next round. Todoroki's gaze snaps back to Izuku's face. Midoriya, he says, face serious. Have we met somewhere before? Izuku tips his head to the side. Before, he wonders, maybe, if all Todoroki has is a vague sense or faint image. It'd make sense, given how he still seemed surprised when he barged in on Izuku killing himself for the second time. Izuku can only hope that Todoroki doesn't remember details. Before you, Todoroki clarifies, clenching and unclenching his jaw. I feel like I've seen you before. Injured. Izuku blinks, frowns. I was injured at USJ, remember? I don't think I've been hurt around you other than that. He watches Todoroki nod slightly, his face still deep in thought. Never mind. Todoroki shakes his head. It doesn't matter. I must have had an odd dream, or something. He walks past Izuku, to the sink, and turns on the tap. Izuku watches him splash water onto his face, the water clinging to his skin, and Izuku steps over to the paper towel dispenser and pulls one out, turning back to offer it to Todoroki. Todoroki blinks at him in surprise, the water already turning to steam and evaporating off of his face. Oh? Izuku blinks, then giggles. Sorry, I just assumed. Todoroki shakes his head. It was nice of you. He stares at Izuku once more, and this time, Izuku sees him look up and down Izuku's body, like he's scanning for injuries. The scrutiny feels odd, uncomfortable, and Izuku shifts his weight between his feet. I'm going to go back out to the field, Izuku says, stepping towards the door and hoping Todoroki doesn't pick up on the fact that Izuku hasn't actually done anything in the bathroom, other than talk to him. Todoroki doesn't reply as Izuku pushes the door, walking out onto the field just in time for President Mick to start announcing the terms of the cavalry team selection. Izuku weighs his options as he crosses the field, timing his breaths to his steps, one inhale for every 3 steps, one exhale for the next 3. It keeps his mind steady, even with the anxiety that's bubbling up in him at the thought of facing the cavalry battle again, knowing that he loses if he teams up with Todoroki and Uraraka and Hatsumi. He also doesn't want to push it, doesn't want Todoroki to remember more, if repeating the events of the last round somehow triggers him to recall more. It's going to be difficult, trying to figure out why Todoroki remembers anything without making the other boys suspicious, but it's really a problem for after the sports festival, when Izuku isn't trying to win. He thinks back to his first attempt and winces. I can't repeat that, he thinks, so I need a different team. But who else would team up with me? Of my friends, I already know Aida and Suyu are with other teams. Izuku scans the field, looks over the groups of students. Most of them are familiar to him by now, but his gaze catches on the purple-haired kid, the one who'd done something to Aida. Izuku wonders, idly, if it's a mind control quirk or if he's reading into it too much. He remembers his name from the last round, too. When President Mick tells them to start picking their teams, Shinsu moves over to the side, talking to Ojiro with his back to Izuku. Izuku can see the exact second that Ojiro's eyes go blank, all of the color draining from his eyes, and his face falling slack, calm and empty. Izuku watches Shinsu sigh, reaching up to rub his hand on the short fuzzy hair at the nape of his neck. Izuku approaches, walking up to him quickly. Shinsu, Izuku says, and Shinsu freezes, turning slowly to look at Izuku. His eyes are widened slightly, a lazy frown on his face. Do you want to team up? Shinsu blinks, opens his mouth, but Izuku presses on. I already know about your quirk, Izuku says. I think it's incredibly well suited to the cavalry battle, and I want to work together. Izuku squeezes his hands into fists with their rests by his sides, because this is the test. If Shinsu brainwashes him, Izuku might very well lose his chance to make an impact during the second round, turned into a mindless puppet instead. Izuku doesn't know his activation condition, but it could be something as simple as eye contact. You know about my quirk, and you want to team up with me anyway? Shinsu asks, eyes narrowing. Izuku can feel that he's waiting to see if Izuku trusts him, if Izuku will take that kind of a risk. I do, Izuku says, voice firm. I think it's an amazing quirk, he adds, because he knows it's what Shinsu needs to hear, even though it hurts somewhere in Izuku's heart to be manipulative like this. Izuku may have been raised quirkless, but that doesn't mean he's unaware of what those with psychological manipulation quirks face. The way they'd be told they were dirty, broken, tainted, evil. Izuku had spent long nights on forums, talking to other outcasts like him, and he'd spoken once with a girl whose quirk let her make other people like her more, if she touched them. She'd been afraid, always, that nobody really liked her, that it was all her quirk, and from what she'd said, the other people in her life were afraid of that, too. She wasn't given a chance to make friends, to talk to people, banned from touching others at school, and constantly questioned at home. Izuku doesn't know the details of Shinsu's quirk or his life, but he can guess. Shinsu blinks, tilting his head to the side slightly. What's in it for me? He asks, looking Izuku over. You're quirkless, aren't you? It's not a question, it's an insult, and Izuku knows it. He doesn't let it rankle him. There are far meaner things to say than the simple truth. I am, he replies, shrugging. And I know all of class 1 in and out. Not only that, but I'm smart. Shinsu snorts. Yeah, so am I. He rolls his eyes as he says it. 2 heads are better than 1, Izuku says, easily. Sure, you could win just by using your quirk. But wouldn't using your quirk to control your teammates as well just make your reputation worse? He watches as Shinsu scowls, lips tugging down and nose twitching slightly. What do you think you know about my reputation? He says, voice low and ugly. I don't need your help. You don't, Izuku agrees, making a big show of folding his arms over his chest slowly, looking at Shinsu and smiling. But wouldn't it be better this way? Shinsu stares at him for a long moment before answering. Fine. But if you get in my way, I'll brainwash you. He glances at Ojiro, who's standing there blankly, not moving except to breathe, staring blankly at the air in front of them. Is that what your quirk does? Izuku watches the way Ojiro doesn't move. Brainwashing. I thought you said you knew what it did already, Shinsu grumbles, narrowing his eyes at Izuku. I saw you put some sort of control effect over Ojiro, but I don't know the details, Izuku answers, stepping forward to wave a hand in front of Ojiro's face. Can he hear us? Shinsu shrugs. Probably. How much they remember afterwards really depends on the person. Physical impact or pain can break them out of it though, so we'll need to be cautious during the battle. He looks down, picking at his nails. I also want a 4th member to my team, so if you have any suggestions, I can go and brainwash them. Izuku tips his head. Last time, it had been Ida and Aoyama, but why don't you just ask them to join up with you? Shinsu raises an eyebrow. Why don't I ask the Hero Course students to team up with a general studies kid that they don't know with a villain's quirk, he says, deadpan. Why don't I do that? Wow, I've never considered the notion. I'm sure it would turn out great. Izuku shrugs. Ojiro would probably work with you, if I asked him to. He's a good guy. He glances over the field, spotting Aoyama standing alone, shoulder thrown back. I've got an idea, he says, turning away from Shinsu to wave at Aoyama. What are you doing? Shinsu asks from behind him. Are they really going to team up with you, even though you're, you know? Izuku can't see his face, but the tone of disdain sounds almost put on. Izuku shrugs, watching as Aoyama walks over to them, a smile on his face. They're all really nice, you know, Izuku replies, glancing back at Shinsu. I don't think any of them have any idea of how the quirkless are normally treated. They just seem surprised. Shinsu blinks, slowly, then looks away. And you want this guy to team up with us? He eyes Aoyama over as he approaches, one hand on his hip and a twinkle in his eye. Hello, Midori, Aoyama says, his gaze sliding off of Shinsu and onto Izuku. What do you need from Wa? He quirks a brow up. Do you want to work with me and Shinsu? Izuku asks, smiling. I noticed you didn't have a team quite yet. Ma'am, yes, that would be agreeable. Aoyama says, a smile splitting his face. I was wondering when somebody would ask me to join them, considering the impressive abilities I possess. He places a hand on his chest, tipping his head, and giving Izuku a look that Izuku thinks is supposed to be some kind of dot actually. Izuku has no idea. Aoyama is just looking at him like that, and Izuku is starting to regret this decision. Aren't you the glitter dude? Shinsu asks, raising an eyebrow, and Aoyama turns to him, nodding. Oh, yes, that's his voice cuts off, and Izuku watches his eyes go blank, his hands dropping to his sides like Ojiro's. Izuku glances over at Shinsu in time to see him sigh, rolling his eyes. Did you have to pick the most annoying person here? Shinsu asks flatly, staring at Izuku. Izuku blinks. He'd honestly just picked Aoyama because he's seen him on Shinsu's team last time, but it's not like he can outright say that. Izuku settles for shrugging his shoulders. I just thought we could use someone with a ranged attack on our team, he replies. Does a quirk activate when someone responds to a question you ask them? Doesn't have to be a question, Shinsu replies, his gaze slipping to look over Izuku's shoulder, in the direction of the stage. They just have to respond to me. Izuku turns, seeing the teachers line up along the stage like they'd been before. Let's go get our headbands, Izuku says, and Shinsu nods. Follow me, he commands, looking at Aoyama and Ojiro, who follow behind him as he starts walking to the stage. Izuku follows, and Present makes announcement telling them to get their headbands starts just as they reach midnight. She tips her head at them when they approach, looking surprised. Midoriya, Shinsu. I didn't know you two were friends, she says, reaching into a bag of headbands and searching through it. We're not, Shinsu replies, his eyes pointed at the ground. Izuku watches him. Not yet, anyway, Izuku says, just as Midnight pauses, tipping her head. Are Aoyama and Ojiro? She looks at them, taking in their state. Are they on your team as well? Izuku nods. Yeah. Shinsu's the writer, by the way. Midnight nods, passing over a headband with 390 written on it before reaching behind herself and pulling a tablet off the stage. She unlocks it and taps on the screen for a minute before turning it back off and looking up at them. You're all set, then. Midnight gives them a smile. You'll be in the 4th starting spot on the left side. Good luck. Izuku nods, opening his mouth to thank her, but Shinsu brushes past him, already walking toward their start spot. Izuku blinks, hurrying after Shinsu and their 2 brainwashed teammates. Do you have a plan in mind? Izuku asks, walking quickly so he draws even with Shinsu. I'm going to wait until near the end of the time, and then brainwash one of the top 4 teams, Shinsu says, not looking at Izuku. It's the simplest way. He steps onto their assigned spot and holds a hand out. Izuku blinks, passing him the headband. Makes sense. Do you have a limit to how many people you can brainwash at a time? Shinsu glances at him from the sides of his eyes as he ties the headbands around his forehead. It won't come up, Shinsu answers, giving his head a shake, his hair fanning out over the headband. You should release Aoyama and Ojiro, Izuku says. It's not like they can leave the team now, anyway. Shinsu snorts. They can choose not to cooperate. I'm not releasing them. He sighs, turning toward them. I'm putting them in the back, you can be the front of the horse. Izuku bites his lip. Okay. They wouldn't be very happy with you afterwards, though. I'm not here to make friends, Shinsu says, glaring at Izuku. I'm here to become a pro hero, not to be nice to stuck-up hero course kids who have had life handed to them on a silver platter. Izuku blinks. Heroes need to have allies, though. They need to be able to work with others. He tips his head slightly at Shinsu. They want to win too, you know. It's in their best interest to work with you. Shinsu shakes his head. Fine, but don't act surprised when they hate me anyway, he says, his voice a low growl, and Izuku sees the color bleed back into Aoyama's and Ojiro's eyes. Aoyama stumbles, like before, and Izuku knows to reach out a hand, steadying him by his shoulder. Aoyama looks up at him, blinking, but it's Ojiro who speaks first. What? He shakes his head, brows furrowed. What did you do to me? He looks up at Shinsu, and Izuku sees a mixture of fear and confusion on his face. I brainwashed you, Shinsu says, shrugging. He looks over to Izuku, a smug look on his face. Sorry, Ojiro, Aoyama. Izuku says, bowing a little to Ojiro. Aoyama has a hand on his shoulder, just standing there quietly. Shinsu was worried nobody would want to team up with him, so he got nervous and used his quirk. I told him you two would want to win of your own power, though, so he let you go. Izuku looks up, flashing his best pacifying smile at Ojiro, who blinks. Shinsu growls from next to him. That's not what happened, Midoriya, he hisses, and Izuku just shrugs. Isn't it? Izuku asks, looking to Aoyama, who blinks, then smiles. I think we'll do wonderfully, Aoyama says, winking at Izuku. Although, I do prefer to be asked politely rather than forced. Ojiro nods. Yeah, he glances off to the side. Same here, but I'll work with what I've got, I guess. Well, let's get set up, then. Izuku smiles. I think Aoyama should be the front of the horse, since his quirk is better suited to it than Izuku swallows than my abilities are. Aoyama nods, and the 4 of them work to form the horse, just in time for Present Mick to call for the final countdown. Shinsu is settling onto Izuku and Ojiro's shoulders, just as the cavalry battle officially starts. It's different than last time, because they don't even move immediately. Izuku glances up to see Shinsu scanning the field, his face serious and focused. The other teams seem to be directing most of their attention to Team Todoroki, like last time, and it's strange for Izuku to see Todoroki teamed up with Iida, Yoirozu, and Kaminari. It's a good matchup, he thinks as he watches them evade an attack from Team Bakugo, Todoroki's mismatched hair just touching the edge of an explosion. Izuku wonders if Todoroki's used to the smell of singed hair. He must be, considering his and his father's quirks. We're going to stay back until closer to the end, Shinsu says from up above, glancing down at them. That quirk is more likely to work if they don't know what to expect. Izuku remembers that Aoyama and Ojiro had been brainwashed still when Shinsu and Izuku had talked strategy. We're just going to rely on your quirk. Ojiro asks, sounding frustrated. Isn't that, I don't know, cruel? How so? Shinsu asks, a mean tone to his voice. Did it hurt when I used it on you? No, but Shinsu cuts Ojiro off before he can finish. Then I don't see how it's any worse than the kid with anger management issues blowing up in 10 million's face, Shinsu says, shrugging his shoulders. Or is it because it's a villain's quirk? Because it isn't flashy and attractive. Ojiro sighs. Dude, I have a mutant quirk, I get what it's like, but you still could have asked us to be on your team. Izuku casts a glance at him, sees the uneasy set to his shoulders and a frown on his face. Would you have said yes? Shinsu asks, quietly. And you know as well as I do that psychological quirks get it worse than the kind you have. Izuku interrupts, tilting his head forward. Incoming, 3 o'clock. Shoji, his hands wrapped around what must be Mineta and Tsuyu on his back, charges at them, approaching from the side of the group that Izuku's on. He's moving quickly, the weight of his teammates not seeming to hinder him in the slightest. Midoriya, you said you know Wano well, right? Shinsu asks, gritting his teeth. Tell me what to say to get the big guy to respond. Izuku blinks. Don't bother trying to insult his appearance, he says, remembering a conversation Shoji had had with Tsuyu and Tokoyami. He's used to that. Just ask a question, he wouldn't be too hard to get an answer out of. Shinsu nods, and they doge to the side, stepping out of the way of Shoji's charge. Watch where you're going. Shinsu snaps, and Izuku notes the bright anger in his voice. He knows it must be fate, but it seems to work on Shoji. It's a competition, he says, before freezing in place, his eyes going blank. Shinsu sighs from above Izuku. Izuku glances up at him. There are 2 inside of his arms, Izuku whispers, praying it's loud enough for Shinsu to hear. Tsuyu is smart, so she might be hard to get, but if you say something inappropriate, Mineta will reply. Something, Shinsu blinks, and he leans back, barely dodging out of the way of a long pink tongue. Izuku bites his lip, moving with his team as they back up, turning so that their front is facing the immobile Shoji. That's nasty, Shinsu says, and Izuku sees Tsuyu poke her face out from between Shoji's arms. Isn't it kind of gross licking people all the time? Tsuyu retracts her tongue, frowning. I don't, she starts to say, her face growing blank halfway through. Izuku sees that she's wearing their headband, and he knows that Shinsu sees it too, because Shinsu tips his head slightly to the side. Give me your headband, he orders, and Tsuyu reaches up, taking her headband off. A lock of her long, dark hair falls over her face, as she stretches up to hand it to Shinsu, who takes it easily. Izuku hears a squeal from inside of Shoji. Mineta wouldn't be a threat, Ojiro says. Well, I don't think he will be, anyway. Izuku nods, agreeing, and Aoyama sighs as they move away from the frozen blank Shoji. I wish we were doing something with a little more sparkle, Aoyama sighs, flipping his hair. This is just so plain. He says it like it's an insult, a terrible burden to be. Izuku huffs a small laugh. You'll get a chance to be dramatic in the 3rd round, Aoyama, agreed, Ojiro says. You know, I guess I have to thank you, Midoriya. I wouldn't have wanted to win as a puppet. I know, Izuku replies, glancing up at Shinsu, who's pointedly looking out over the field. Izuku can't help but think that it's almost cruel of Ojiro to keep hammering on it. Shinsu hasn't apologized, though, so I suppose I can't blame Ojiro for being upset. And now we wait, Aoyama says, sighing. At least this gives me a chance to rest after the obstacle course. Wasn't finishing 42nd enough of a rest as is? Shinsu quips, and Izuku winces. No, that was just my warm-up, Aoyama replies back easily, seemingly unfazed. Izuku blinks, but doesn't say anything. Hey, what's our time at? Ojiro asks. I can't see from my angle. Izuku glances to his side, at the large clock. We've got 3 minutes left, he replies, biting at his lower lip. It feels wrong to win this way, but Izuku knows he doesn't have many chances left, not if he wants to be able to reset in the 3rd round. If he's learned anything from being on the streets, it's that sometimes to do good, you have to fight dirty. Izuku wonders if Shinsu feels this way about his quirk all the time. If every victory feels like cheating. Izuku supposes his own quirk is cheating, in its own way. He's the only one here who gets to try again. Let's aim for them, Shinsu says, nodding his head at Team Tetsutetsu, where they're running away from the clash between Team Bakugo and Team Todoroki. Shiozaki's vines are making a barrier between them and the explosions Koch-chan is unleashing, and Izuku nods. They move forward, headed straight for the other team. They're preoccupied, but not completely oblivious, and Izuku sees the guy in front with the big teeth notice them first, shouting something up to his teammates that Izuku can't quite make out of the loud boom of an explosion across the field. "Hey, green hair." Shinsu shouts, "Nice tits." Izuku blinks, surprise, and Shiizaki's head whips around to look at him, a red flush and a furious expression rising on her face. Her eyes drain of color, and Izuku sees Shinsu smirk. "Figured I'd give this something inappropriate a shot," he says, glancing down at Izuku. "Give me your headbands and hold your team in place," he shouts back at Shiizaki. His face remains blank and impassive, as her vines stretch up to rip the headbands off of Tetsutsu's forehead and neck, whipping them towards Shinsu, as another wave of vines wrap around her teammates, securing them to the ground. "What the hell, Shiizaki?" Tetsu exclaiming, his hand flailing after the vines with his headbands. "Sorry, I guess your girlfriend likes me better," Shinsu says, snatching the headbands out from the vines, and securing them on his head with a vicious grin. "She's not my Tetsu's face goes slack, and Izuku blinks. "You're really good at that," Izuku whispers, and Shinsu snorts. "Being an asshole." It's really easy. He doesn't look down, though his eyes still pinned on the rest of Team Tetsu. Izuku can't see the guy with spiky black hair under the vines, but Big Teeth is struggling to get free, grumbling and cursing under his breath. "What the hell did you do to them?" he asks, looking up at Shinsu, and Shinsu shrugs, a playful grin on his face. "Why don't you ask nicely and maybe I'll tell you." Shinsu feigns a yawn, stretching his hands above his head. Quickly, though, "You're just about out of time." He doesn't even get the entire word out before his face goes blank, his hands dropping down and letting the vines pin them to his sides. "Too easy," Shinsu says, dropping the fake grin. "How much time?" "Time's up, listeners." Present Mick's voice interrupts him, a cheery bright sound that reminds Izuku of last round, when they'd been dazed and defeated. Now, Izuku is injured, and they'd barely had to move, hadn't had to struggle or run or fight. It was easy, really. The hardest part was convincing Shinsu to cooperate, Izuku thinks with a grin. "We're going to the next round." When the noonday break is called, Izuku finds himself walking toward the bathroom, just out of habit. He catches himself in front of a gate that leads out of the arena, about 100 feet from the hallway that leads to the bathroom he's killed himself in twice now. He's a little dazed, he notes absently. He stops walking, turning toward the gate that faces the outside, with trees bordering the path on the other side, leaves green and broad. Izuku stares out at it, watching the gentle wind brush through the trees, sending dappled shadows over the ground. Midoriya Todoroki's voice startles Izuku, and Izuku jumps, flinching back on reflex. He turns to see Todoroki, standing there with his hands in his pockets, his face impassive. "Todoroki," Izuku says, blinking and forcing his heart to settle back down. He takes a slow breath. "Looks like we're both moving on to the third round," Todoroki says, walking past Izuku, into the shadow of the gate. "I wanted to talk to you, before the tournament." "Oh?" Izuku asks, biting at his lip. He watches Todoroki walk another few steps, his back to Izuku when he speaks again. "There's something going on with you," he says, voice contemplative. "I don't know what it is, but there's something unusual. You're hiding something big, Midoriya." "I'm not. There's not anything like." Izuku cuts himself off when Todoroki turns back to face him, his blue and gray eyes facing him. "I know that something happened, between the first and second rounds, Midoriya." Todoroki looks up and down Izuku's form. "Not only that, but you've attracted special attention from Aizawa-sensei." "That's just because I'm quirkless," Izuku says, rubbing a hand on the back of his neck. "Look, Todoroki, I really don't have anything like what you're saying going on with me." Todoroki tilts his head slightly to the side, his eyes narrowing. "I don't believe you," he answers. "You know things you shouldn't. And you act differently, sometimes. Like you have some hidden insight." He blinks, slow and calm. "I'm going to beat you anyway, though. I have no choice." Izuku blinks, swallowing around the lump rising in his throat. "You don't?" Todoroki looks down, at the shadowed ground. "Have you ever heard of quirk marriages?" he asks, voice quietly. "You know who my father is, of course." Izuku blinks. "Endeavor, right?" He'd heard about it, of course. "Yes," Todoroki answers, looking off to the side. The position hides his burned side from Izuku, and Izuku gets a horrible feeling that he knows where this is going. "My mother's family was easy to convince. When the number 2 hero wants your daughter's hand in marriage, it's simpler to just agree, after all." Todoroki tips his head to the side, a flash of anger crossing his face. He only wanted her for her quirk. "With it, he created me. I'm nothing but a tool, Midoriya, and I hate it." Izuku swallows. "Todoroki," he breathes, and Todoroki's head snaps to stare into his eyes. "As I remember it, my mother was always crying. She'd grown to hate this left side of mine, you see." Todoroki raises one hand, his fingers brushing against the scar over his eyes. "Or at least that's what she told me when she poured boiling water onto my face." Izuku gasps, clasping a hand over his mouth. Todoroki's face is twisted, full of pain and fear and anger. "I'm going to rise to the top, without using my father's quirk," Todoroki says, dropping his hand. "You understand, though, how angry it would make him if I lost to you. When you're quirkless." Todoroki clenches his fists into tight balls by his sides, and Izuku can see the muscles in his forearms tensing. So, no matter what you've got going on, no matter what your secret is, I'm going to win. And I'm going to do it with only my right side. Todoroki steps toward him, and Izuku can feel the cold radiating off of him, like an open freezer door or a blast from a winter storm. Todoroki turns, looking back out, towards where the mess hall for the arena is, but Izuku steps forward. I was given a second chance, Izuku says, and the other boy pauses, glancing back over his shoulder. I wouldn't be here, but I got lucky. I got to try again. I keep getting second chances. Izuku looks down at his hands, sees them starting to shake. People keep doing things for me, forgiving me for my mistakes. People who I'd thought hated me, they're giving me a chance to be friends again. Things that should end it, for me, that should mean I have to give up. They don't. It sounds stupid, compared to what you've been through, but, Izuku looks up, squeezing his hands into fists. I'm not going to waste all of the extra chances I've been getting. I'm not going to throw away how lucky I am by losing. So, that's my declaration to you. Izuku swallows, grinning wide. I'm going to beat you. If not now. Izuku takes a step forward, determination filling him. Then next time, after eating, Izuku leaves the mess hall alone, stepping outside into the spring air. It's getting warmer as the day moves on, and now that Izuku's stomach is full of good food, and he's not in the middle of the competition, it's really pleasant. Izuku could take a nap out here, if he was the napping type, so he's not surprised to see Aizawa there, leaning against the side of the building with his head tipped back, looking up at the trees. Sensei, Izuku says, lifting a hand in a small wave when Aizawa tips his head to the side, looking at him. Midoriya. Aizawa straightens up, unfolding his arms where they'd been crossed over his chest, and sliding his hands into his pockets instead as he straightens up. I've been wanting to talk to you. Izuku blinks. You have. He shifts his feet, the sensation of the sandy path, scraping under his feet soothing. It reminds him of being on patrol. Aizawa nods. You've done well to make it this far. The tournament is going to be more difficult for you, though. He looks down at Izuku. Don't be afraid to fight dirty. You're working at an inherent disadvantage against most of your peers. Have you seen the tournament bracket? Izuku shakes his head. I was about to go look, he answers. You're up against Sero first, Aizawa says. I don't want any of Class 1 to lose because you were too busy being nice to your classmates. He narrows his eyes slightly at Izuku. Something tells me you're one of the most likely to do something like that. Izuku feels his face flush. I wouldn't lose on purpose, he responds, biting at his lower lip. No, you wouldn't. Aizawa sighs. But you'd risk it, if it meant helping your friends. What would you have done in the second round if Ojiro and Aoyama had refused to work with Shinsu? Aizawa raises a hand just as Izuku opens his mouth to ask how he knew. Ojiro spoke with me about it afterward. Izuku blinks, pausing to take a breath before he answers, because he can't exactly tell Aizawa. Well, I would have gone to the bathroom and slit my wrists. They wouldn't have, Izuku says, voice firm. And, they didn't. It was a gamble, Aizawa replies. When you took to help your classmates, at a potential detriment to yourself. Izuku shakes his head. It's not a gamble if I knew what was going to happen, he answers. I know Aoyama and Ojiro better than that. He watches Aizawa arch an eyebrow at him. You're a strange one, Midoriya. Aizawa sighs. Go, get ready for your matches. Just keep what I said in mind. He waves a hand, shooing Izuku away. I will. Izuku chirps in response, waving at Aizawa as he walks back down the path. Izuku stands in the tunnel, looking out on the field. His hands are sweating, and he wipes his palms on the fabric of his sports uniform, taking a deep, steadying breath. The tunnel is dark, despite the bright light of the sun illuminating the field ahead. Izuku can see the arena, the square marked off with white tape. That must be where his match against Sero will take place. It's unfortunate that I'm going first, Izuku thinks. But it means I have less time to make myself nervous, at least. Young Midoriya. Izuku blinks, turning to see All Might in his skeletal form. Izuku swallows, tipping his head to the side. I haven't seen him like this, not since that day on the roof. All Might. Izuku swallows, watches as All Might chuckles, looking off to the side. So it was you, on the roof that day. I thought I was remembering right, but All Might rubs a hand on the back of his neck, grimacing. I wanted to apologize to you, and to offer some words of encouragement. Apologize? Izuku blinks, unsure. He's mostly gotten past his resentment of All Might that he'd held for a few weeks after the incident, but he hasn't thought of the #1 hero as the type to remember him, not when he hadn't brought up that fateful day even once, not when he hadn't seemed to notice Izuku in class, not really. All Might nods. It seems I was wrong about you. I'm sorry for telling you that you couldn't be a hero. It was wrong of me to crush your dream like that. He tips his head down, in a slight bow. I came to wish you luck. I dismissed you, based on your quirkless status. I didn't take the time to see what other traits you had, and I feel it cost us both. He looks up at Izuku, clenching a fist. Prove me wrong, young Midoriya. I know you can. Izuku feels tears, hot and wet, building up in his eyes. You really mean it. He looks at All Might, watches the man smile slightly, his teeth large and bright on his emaciated face. I do. Now, get out there and do your best. go beyond. All Might raises his right fist in his signature move, and Izuku mirrors him, grinning. Plus Ultra. Izuku cheers, quietly but brightly. He feels a spark of something, bright and happy and proud bubble in his chest as he turns, walking out onto the field. Sero emerges from the other side, a bright grin on his face as they step into the ring. Hey Midoriya, Sero says, putting one hand on his hip as they face each other. I'm not gonna go easy on you, just saying. Izuku grins back. I wouldn't expect you to, he replies, and Sero nods, grinning still. The first match. Present Mick's voice booms over the field. We have Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless hero course student who participated in that surprise steal of 3rd place in the Cavalry battle, versus Hanta Sero, from the same class in the hero course. His tape dispensing quirk proved quite useful in landing him and the rest of his team 2nd place in the last round. The rules are simple. You win by either immobilizing your opponent, knocking them out of the ring, or getting them to say I give up. We have Recovery Girl and a medical team on standby, so go all out. Fighting dirty is also perfectly fine. This isn't a battle of ethics. Present Mick laughs, and Izuku remembers Aizawa's advice from earlier. Killing is, of course, not allowed. If it gets to that point, Cementus will step in. Ready. Izuku takes a deep breath, raising his fists in a fighting stance. Start. Present Mick cries out, and Izuku sees Sero pull his elbows up, aiming his tape dispensers at Izuku's face. Izuku ducks, twisting out of the way as 2 long strips of clear tape shoot past him, glistening in the sunlight. They fly past the ring, their cut ends fluttering when they land. Sorry, Midoriya, Sero says, shrugging as he walks toward him. It's kind of unfair to you, huh? One-on-one like this, he shoots out another strip of tape, and Izuku dodges again, glancing down to check his position. He's still well within bounds. Really? Izuku says, sliding back into a fighting stance and darting forward towards Sero. I don't think it's unfair at all. He slides under a shot of tape aimed a little too high, and throws a punch, quick and sharp, to Sero's stomach. Izuku hears Sero gasp, his face twisting into a grimace as Izuku grabs the front of his uniform with his other hand, and pulls Sero into his knee, as he raises it up to slam into Sero's ribs. Izuku clenching his teeth in sympathy as he feels the hard impact into his classmate's chest, hearing Sero's breath rush out of him. Izuku slides back just as Sero shoots out a strand of tape at him, dodging it. Damn, Midoriya, Sero wheezes, clutching his stomach with one hand. You're pretty good. He raises both elbows, shooting a volley of tape out that Izuku has to roll on the ground to dodge, the sandy ground scuffing against his shoulder as he somersaults out of the way. Izuku curses internally as he feels a piece of tape, sticky and tight, wrap around his bicep as he gets to his feet. Gotcha, Sero says, breaking the tape off of his elbow dispenser and gripping it with his hands, tugging on it and yanking Izuku to the side. Izuku digs his heels into the ground, his eyes on the white barrier of the ring as he's dragged toward the boundary. Not yet, he growls as he reaches forward, grabbing the tape between him and Sero, and dragging himself forward, like he's climbing a rope. The tape is thicker than he thought, and it makes it easier for him to get a grip, hurling himself forward towards Sero. Sero grimaces, dropping the tape he's holding and letting it go slack. Izuku nearly falls from the lack of tension, but he catches himself in time, running at Sero. Sero flinches back, but Izuku sweeps his legs with one of his, and Sero goes tumbling to the ground. Just before his back hits the ground, Izuku sees him raise his elbow, and a piece of tape shoots out, smacking into Izuku's chest and dragging him down on top of him. Izuku bites down on the tip of his tongue when he falls, accidentally filling his mouth with the taste of iron. He lands on top of Sero, getting an elbow to the face and a knee to the gut. At least I'm not underneath him, he thinks, struggling to get somewhat upright, so that he can attempt to hold Sero in some kind of headlock or something. Izuku fumbles, struggling as Sero writhes underneath him. Izuku hisses in frustration as Sero shoves a hand in his face, pushing him off of him. Izuku flips over, hopping into a crouch, just as Sero sits up and shoots a piece of tape that wraps itself around Izuku's forearm, tugging him forward as Sero readies a punch. Izuku jerks himself to the side, and Sero's punch flies right over his shoulder. Izuku, suddenly, remembers something from on the streets, and he leans forward without thinking, sinking his teeth into the meat of Sero's forearm. Hey! Sero shouts, shaking his arm, but Izuku bites down harder, trying to elbow Sero in the ribs without looking. What the hell, man? Sero gives his arm a firm shake, dislodging Izuku. Izuku backs away, hopping to his feet and getting back into a fighting stance just in time for Sero to stand up, shaking his arm out and grimacing. Izuku can taste blood in his mouth, but he's not sure if it's from when he bit his own tongue earlier, or if it's Sero's. Did you really bite me? Sero asks incredulously, looking down at his arm. Izuku sees the red, bleeding ring he'd left, but he doesn't hesitate, barreling forward to shove Sero back. Sero flails, backing up, cursing and trying to dig his feet into the ground as Izuku gives him a firm shove, pushing him over the edge of the ring with a groan. Sero is out of bounds. Present Mick announces as Sero lands on the ground, his butt on the dirt just outside the white tape. He's caught himself on his hands, and he's looking up at Izuku with a stunned look on his face. Midoriya moves on to the second round. Izuku blinks, then holds out a hand to Sero. Sorry about that, he says, giving Sero a sheepish smile. I couldn't think of anything else. Sero blinks up at him, then grins wide, reaching up to take his hand. Dude, don't apologize. That was awesome. It's my fault for underestimating you, he says, and Izuku helps pull him to his feet. You know your nose is bleeding, right? Sero points to his own nose, and Izuku blinks, reaching up to wipe his sleeve across his face. He looks down at it, sees the smear of bright blood. I didn't even notice, Izuku replies, glancing up at Sero. He's got a smear of blood on his forehead that isn't his, and his face is starting to bruise. Izuku looks at his arms, sees what looks kind of like carpet burn from sliding around on the ground, as well as the ring-shaped bite mark from Izuku. It looks like two matching crescents, red and already swelling. Now that they're up close, Izuku can see that only a few places are bleeding, but the whole thing looks like it'll make a nasty bruise. You were smart to wear the long-sleeved uniform, Sero comments, brushing dirt off of his arms and wincing. The ground here isn't very forgiving. Izuku nods, not saying that he hadn't thought of that at all. I wear this to hide my cuts, he thinks, but it did come in handy. Come on, Izuku startles, turning to see Aizawa walking up to them, his hands in his pockets. Let's get you two to Recovery Girl and get you patched up. He looks at them, a faint smile on his lips. You both did very well. Izuku grins up at him. I listened to what you said about fighting dirty. Aizawa raises an eyebrow. I notice, he says, and Izuku swears the little huff of air he lets out next is a laugh. Nervous? Uraraka leans on the table in Izuku's prep room. She's changed into casual clothes since she didn't make it into the third round. A little, Izuku admits. He's all fixed up, courtesy of Recovery Girl, but his head kind of hurts, and he's still a little tired from it. He didn't get to watch Todoroki's first match, and facing him so early in the competition is making Izuku's palms sweat. Even though Uraraka has described Todoroki's opening move, a huge wall of ice, to him in excruciating detail, Izuku can't think up a way around it. You'll be okay, Uraraka says, patting him on the top of his head with one hand. It matters more that you stand out, right? I think you did that just fine in your first match, really. Izuku nods. I don't want to lose right away, though. Izuku picks at his cuticles, twisting his hands on the tabletop. I want to make him work for it. Uraraka giggles. Are you gonna bite him, too? Izuku feels his face heat up. That he stumbles on his words, his face surely bright red. Uraraka cuts him off. It was hilarious. And she meets his gaze, looking serious. It was genius. I think we've all been underestimating you, Deku. Izuku looks away. It wasn't that smart, it was instinctual. He hadn't planned it out. It was great. Uraraka pats his head, again, then sighs. Izuku looks up to see her rolling her eyes. You're too humble, Deku. Get down there and kick some ass, okay? Izuku nods, smiling at her. I'll try. He says, standing up and turning to glance at the clock. Uraraka's right that he needs to head down. There's about 5 minutes until the start of the match. He starts towards the door, and Uraraka follows him. I'll walk with you until the tunnel, okay? She smiles at him, and Izuku smiles back at her gratefully. They walk in relative silence, the sounds of their soft footsteps against the tile of the building filling the space. Izuku knows that he's died twice, during the festival. They've been to different reset points, but he really doesn't know if there's enough time between them for it to matter. He only has about 2 or 3 more deaths in him before he won't be in any state to fight, and it makes him nervous, his heart picking up in its beating and his palms sweating. He doesn't want to take the gamble of dying and losing in the first round next time, but how could he beat Todoroki? Would he even make it to a fight with Todoroki next time? The thing is, Izuku knows his best chance of getting far in the festival is to reset and hope he gets easier matches. He's seen the bracket. If he beats Todoroki, he's probably up against Koch-chan in the semifinals, anyway. He knows he can't beat Koch-chan in a one-on-one in an open space, as much as it hurts. But Izuku doesn't want to just win. It's stupid and it's naive and he knows that, but he wants to fight Todoroki, and he wants to make him use his fire. He wants to show Todoroki that his fire isn't his father's. That it's his. Izuku doesn't know why. He doesn't know why he cares, but he thinks it has something to do with the way Todoroki found him, twice. The way Todoroki trusted him with his story, even when Izuku hadn't really told him anything. Izuku doesn't get that from people. Koch-chan sees him as a rival, but not a threat, not an equal. Todoroki had challenged him. He said he wouldn't lose, said it like it was a possibility in the first place. It makes Izuku want to win. As he steps through the doors to the tunnel, he turns and looks at Uraraka, smiling at her. Good luck, Deku. She grins back at him. He nods to her, stepping through into the tunnel. It's the same as last round, dim and calm and quiet. All Might isn't there waiting, though. Across the field, in the other tunnel, Izuku can see an orange glow. And ever, he realizes, as he watches the fiery man gesture. He can barely make out Todoroki in the shadows, looking up at his father. Izuku wishes he could see their faces, could hear their conversation, but he can't. Izuku takes a deep, steadying breath, and steps out of the tunnel, into the field. He's surprised to hear cheers, loud and bright from the audience, and when he looks up, he sees a group of Class 1A cheering him on. He can see Sero up there, and Izuku grins when Sero mimes biting his own arm and gives Izuku a thumbs up. Izuku glances back toward the other tunnel just in time to see Todoroki step out, his expression dark and his face shadowed by his hair. A similar cheer rises up from the audience, but it doesn't feel the same, not with the haunted look on Todoroki's face. Izuku swallows, turning to face him completely. "Are you ready for the second round?" Present Mix shouts. Both from Class 1A, we have Shadow Todoroki and Izuku Midoriya. Todoroki is quite an impressive character, defeating his first opponent in mere seconds in the first round. Midoriya is a bit of an underdog, but he pulled through with a decisive victory last round. Let's pay close attention to this one. Izuku watches Todoroki take a deep breath, an icy mist coming from his nostrils. "Ready?" Izuku swallows, tensing and getting ready to dodge. His muscles feel like live wires, tense and painful. "Go!" Present Mix screams, and Izuku rushes forward, dashing low to the ground at Todoroki's feet. Todoroki sees him coming, of course there's nowhere to hide. As Izuku slides forward, he sees Todoroki raise one hand, not even flinching away. His right hand comes up, and Izuku sees the starburst of ice bloom out from it before it overtakes him, a wave of thick blue ice that wraps around Izuku's limbs, pinning him in his position. Izuku can hear the crackling of the wave as it keeps growing, pulling Izuku back and up. It stops, and Todoroki drops his hand, frost falling from where it's gathered on his clothes. "Midoriya, can you move?" Midnight asks from the sidelines, sighing. Izuku swallows, tugging at his arms. The cold of the ice is painful, stinging and burning at his skin, and no matter how hard he pulls, he can't rip his arms loose. "No," he replies, hating the way his voice shakes and quivers. "I can't win against him," he thinks, his head spinning. "He's too powerful. What was I thinking? Making him use his fire. I'd be lucky to last 5 minutes. The match is over." Present Mix shouts, as bubbly as ever. Just like his first round, Todoroki wins in a matter of moments. "We'll take a short break to clear the field, like last time." The audience is murmuring, a heavy chatter that fills Izuku's head. He tries to move his arms, but they don't budge. Todoroki walks up to him, his face dark and his brows low. He looks almost sad as he presses his left hand to Izuku's chest, a burst of steam coming off of Izuku's uniform, as the ice starts to melt. "Sorry, I went a little overboard," Todoroki says, looking at Izuku's chest and not his eyes. "I was just angry is all." Izuku swallows, not replying as he's released from the ice. He falls out of the wave of it, barely landing on his feet. "I'm shivering," he notes, holding his hands up to look at them. "Are you okay?" Todoroki asks, glancing up at his face, then back down at the ground. He drops his hands, holding them by his side. "Never mind," he says, turning on his heels and walking back towards his tunnel. Izuku blinks, takes a deep breath, and turns, too. He walks into the tunnel, feeling the murmurs and the shouts of the audience on his back, even though he knows they're just cheering for Todoroki's win. Izuku feels like they're mocking him. He sees Aizawa, leaning against the side wall of the tunnel, but doesn't look at him, just walks by. "Midoriya," Aizawa says, and Izuku hears him following him. "Where are you going?" "I want to be alone," Izuku replies, distantly. He doesn't feel like he's really here. He isn't, not for long, anyway. Aizawa doesn't reply right away, but Izuku can still hear his footsteps, can hear him sigh. "Is it a good idea?" Aizawa asks, and Izuku turns to look at him. "Why wouldn't it be?" Izuku replies, sliding his gaze back forward when he thinks he sees concern on his teacher's face. "I'm fine. I just want to be alone. Todoroki is the one who needs support right now, anyway. "Okay," Aizawa replies. He follows Izuku into the building anyway. Izuku wants to hit him for some reason, but he doesn't. He walks down the hallway without looking back until he doesn't hear footsteps behind him anymore. The bathroom is too risky, he thinks, walking along the hallway until he spots what he's looking for. It's an unassuming door, shut tightly, with the label janitorial on the wall beside it. Izuku tries the handle, surprised when it opens readily. He slips inside, not bothering to turn on the lights. It's pitch black in the closet, and when he fumbles behind him, he finds the lock for the door. It turns with a click, and Izuku sighs, pressing his eyes shut for just a moment. When he opens them again, they've started adjusting to the darkness. Izuku can see a shelf, laden with chemicals, a janitor's cart, bright yellow and ready for use, and a tiled area with a drain in the bottom and a faucet up top. For washing the cart, he thinks, and Izuku walks over to it. It smells awful, like ammonia and artificial lemons. Izuku sits on the tile, holds his wrists above the drain, and slices himself open. If he shuts his eyes and concentrates on the smell of his own blood, he can almost pretend he feels okay. Izuku blinks awake in the mess hall, his spoon clattering to the table when it falls out of his hand. It splashes miso soup onto his hand and the table. "Deku?" Uraraka tips her head at him, across the table. "You okay, man?" Kirishima leans forward, reaches in front of Koch-chan, and leans over the table to pass Izuku a napkin. "You got kinda pale all of a sudden." "I'm okay," Izuku says, taking the napkin with a shaky hand. I just spaced out. Uraraka frowns, furrowing her brow. Are you sure? I'm going to get some air. Izuku chokes out, standing up and pushing his chair back. The whole table is looking at him. Kirishima and Uraraka and Koch-chan and Iida and Izuku can't take it. He turns, not caring how it looks, and hurries out of the mess hall, hands clenched into fists at his sides. It feels like every sound in the mess hall is burning his skin, and he can't handle it. He rushes outside, almost running, and the bright spring sunshine sends a shiver down his spine. Izuku freezes, outside the mess hall, staring up at the leaves, lit from above by the sky, too bright and too pretty for how he feels. He doesn't know what he wants, doesn't know if he wants to curl up somewhere dark and quiet, or if he wants to punch a wall, or if he wants to open a vein. He wants to be Todoroki, he thinks. He wants to be less of a failure, maybe. Midoriya. Aizawa is leaning against the side of the mess hall, because of course he is. Izuku can't catch a break. He glances at Aizawa, sees surprise, maybe, on his face. Sensei, Izuku says, and his voice cracks, embarrassingly. Aizawa's brow furrows. Are you alright? He straightens up, pulling himself off the side of the building and stepping forward, looking Izuku over. Izuku stares back at him. Izuku blinks. He shakes his head. I'm fine, he answers, and Aizawa raises an eyebrow at him. You don't look fine. He raises a hand, presses the back of it to Izuku's forehead. Come with me, he says, turning and walking into the trees. Izuku follows, his feet dragging through the grass. Izuku reaches out a hand as he passes a tree, scraping his palm against it. The bark is rough and cool, and the sensation is grounding, just a little. He blinks, trying to keep his focus, but he can't. Aizawa stops, and Izuku pauses, looking around. They're in a clearing in the woods, a little circle where the sunlight drifts down from above freely, not broken up by the leaves. Aizawa turns to face Izuku. It's quieter, over here, he says, his gaze moving over Izuku's face. Izuku nods. Do you know what's wrong? Izuku swallows, shakes his head. I think I'm nervous, he says, looking at the ground. The grass is a mix of greens, the blades long and untrimmed. He can see an ant crawling up a thin blade, a little black body that sways with the wind. About the tournament? Aizawa asks. Izuku glances up at him. Yeah, Izuku murmurs. I don't want to lose in an instant, he says, his voice cracking. I'm so weak. Aizawa sighs. You're not weak, Midoriya. You're learning. He reaches forward, setting a hand on Izuku's shoulder. The contact is warm, heavy, and it brings Izuku back to himself just a little. I'm quirkless, Izuku says, clenching the muscles of his jaw. How am I supposed to beat someone like Todoroki? Or Koch-chan? Aizawa blinks, slowly, his face staying calm, but filling with something like understanding. You work hard and you train harder, Aizawa says. The quirk doesn't make the hero, Midoriya. He sighs, squeezing Izuku's shoulder. Even if you lose here, you have a lot of time ahead of you. You'll get stronger. Izuku nods, swallowing. I'm sorry for bothering you, he says, twisting his hands together. It was your lunch break, and I'm being stupid. You're not bothering me, Aizawa says, voice firm, and you're not being stupid. It's my job to help you kids through these things. Izuku nods, biting at his lip. Do you know if the tournament bracket is released yet? He needs to know if his reset point is before or after the randomization. If he's paired against Sero again, he knows he'll do fine, but he doesn't know what to do against Todoroki. Aizawa takes his hand off of Izuku's shoulder, reaching into his pocket instead. Let's check, he says, fishing out his phone and messing with it for a moment. It's up, he says, scrolling through something. Izuku leans forward. Who am I against? He can't see Aizawa's screen, but Aizawa turns it for him, showing him the bracket. You're up in the fourth match, against Aoyama. Aizawa holds the phone out still, tucking one hand into his pocket. Don't hold back on him just because you teamed up with him in the cavalry battle. Izuku nods, eyes still on the bracket. I won't, he says, reading. If I win, I'll face Koch-chan in the second round, Aizawa hums, turning the phone back to look at it. Either him or Monoma from Class 1B, Aizawa says, looking at the screen impassively. You don't know for certain that Bakugo would win. Izuku nods. Right, he says, because he supposes he doesn't know. Not yet, anyway. When Izuku steps into the tunnel again, he isn't surprised to see All Might there. He moves through the conversation, trying to match his words from the first time the best he can. He thinks All Might can tell something is off, but he doesn't comment on it if he does. It's refreshing to not have to explain himself. It's also nice to hear the apology again, even if it's not a surprise this time through. When All Might turns to leave, Izuku turns to face the field, that same view he's seen twice already. He wonders how many more times he'll get to see it from this view, as one of the competitors. He can see Aoyama too, looking nervous and the light spilling into his own tunnel. Izuku smiles at him, but he doesn't think Aoyama can see his face from this distance. Izuku walks forward, out into the field. It's still dazzlingly bright as he walks into the ring. Aoyama seems to be enjoying it though, waving at the audience and grinning brightly. When he steps into the ring, their eyes meet, and Izuku smiles back at Aoyama, who nods. For our next match, we have Izuku Midoriya and Yuga Aoyama, both from Class 1A. These two were on the same team for the cavalry battle, and pulled off a surprise steal of 3rd place. Present mix sounds the same as always. It's a nice constant throughout this. Izuku hasn't listened to his radio show regularly since starting at UA, but he thinks he might start again. Ready? He asks, and Izuku drops into a fighting stance. Aoyama lifts his hands to rest on the back of his head and winks at Izuku. Start. As soon as he speaks, Aoyama is firing off his naval laser, a brilliant, shining beam that Izuku dodges easily. He steps to the side, dashing forward at Aoyama as the beam dissipates, dissolving into a faint trace of glitter in the air. Izuku pulls his leg back, aiming a solid kick. It collides with the ridge of Aoyama's hip, and Izuku grits his teeth as it knocks Aoyama almost to the ground, the man folding over for just a second before catching himself. "You fast," Midoriya Aoyama says, leaning back and firing a laser that Izuku just barely manages to slide out of the way of. He can feel the buzz of energy as it grazes the edge of his uniform, burning away the fabric there, and leaving a ripped patch just above his left knee. Izuku uses the momentum from the dodge to propel himself forward, sweeping a leg into Aoyama's ankles. This time, Aoyama does full, and Izuku watches him land on hands and knees, biting his lip and looking up at Izuku. Izuku grimaces, not really looking forward to this next part, then throws himself on Aoyama's back, his knees driving into the space between Aoyama's shoulder blades. Izuku hears the sharp exhale of breath when it knocks the wind out of his friend. "Sorry, Aoyama," Izuku says, planting one hand on the back of Aoyama's head then shoving it down into the ground. "But if I let you up, you can use your quirk. I can't afford to get hurt here." Aoyama coughs, trying to press himself up off of the ground with his hands, his elbows shaking with the effort. "You're something extraordinary," Midoriya Aoyama wheezes out. "I give up." Izuku blinks in surprise, just as Midnight raises a hand. Aoyama has conceded. The match goes to Midoriya. She glances up, presumably at the announcer's stand, and Izuku hears Present Mick repeating the ruling more loudly. Izuku doesn't really listen, he's too preoccupied with releasing Aoyama's neck and standing up, trying to put as little extra pressure on Aoyama's back as possible. "Why did you concede?" Izuku asks, offering a hand to Aoyama. "We'd only just started." Aoyama smiles at him, a sly smile that Izuku can't read. "I know when I've been beat," he says, taking Izuku's hand. "It did not strike me as particularly elegant to drag out a battle I knew I could not win." He lifts himself up with Izuku's help, but he doesn't release Izuku's hand. "How do you know that you would have lost?" Izuku says, looking down at where Aoyama's hand is still clasped around his own. "Because," Aoyama says, a sage look on his face. "There was absolutely no way I could have gotten you off of my back." He nods, then releases Izuku's hand. Izuku squints at him. "What?" he asks, and Aoyama just shrugs, flipping his hair out of his face, and turning to walk toward the tunnel he'd come in from. "Au revoir," Midoriya Aoyama says in response, giving him a quick wave before turning away. Izuku stares after him, then shakes his head. "I don't get that guy," he mutters, turning to walk back toward his own tunnel. "At least this means I stand a chance of actually getting to fight Todoroki this round," he thinks, even though he doubts that his second match would go quite this well. Not if it's Koch-chan he's facing. Izuku settles into his seat in the stands, wrapping his hands around the grips on the seat. Uraraka beams at him from the seat next to him. "Hey Deku, you totally destroyed Aoyama," she says, gesturing with her hands. "He didn't even stand a chance before you." She makes a noise with her mouth, something like a whoosh, and Izuku nods, smiling despite himself. "I guess I did okay," he says, shrugging. From Uraraka's other side, Iida leans forward, a bright smile on his face. "You did exceedingly well, Midoriya. I can only hope I'll have the chance to face you later on," Iida says, meeting Izuku's gaze, and Izuku looks away, biting his lip. "Well, I'll probably be facing Koch-chan next," so, he trails off, and he hears an understanding sigh from Uraraka. "You beat him in the training exercise, didn't you?" she says, and Izuku looks up to see a soft smile on her face. "He's up next, by the way." She points to the field, and Izuku looks down. Koch-chan and Monoma look like spiky and smooth versions of the same haircut as they walk out into the field. Izuku swallows. He doesn't think he's ready to face Koch-chan one-on-one like this. As much as Uraraka is right that I beat him in battle training, he thinks, gripping the arms of the chair hard as the two combatants step into the ring together, I have never been able to win against Koch-chan one-on-one. I don't stand a chance. It's time for the next match, President Mick says. First up, we've got Katsuki Bakugo from Class 1A. He got off to quite an explosive start in the first 2 rounds. The audience laughs, and Izuku leans forward, trying to see Koch-chan's expression. It's impossible to tell from the distance, but Izuku would guess that Koch-chan is already pissed, judging from the small sparks popping around his palms where they're held at his sides. He'll be facing off against Monoma from Class 1B. This hero course student showed off his powerful copying quirk in the second round, when he and Bakugo fought each other for that first place spot. Now, they'll finally get a rematch, one-on-one. Are we ready? The audience cheers, and Izuku watches Koch-chan slide into a crouch, ready to fight. Monoma doesn't move, hands on his hips. Start. Izuku watches Koch-chan burst forward, twisting his body in preparation for his right hook. Izuku bites his lip, leaning forward in the seat. "You telegraphing," he whispers, and sure enough, Monoma dodges easily, tapping one hand on the side of Koch-chan's arm as the punch flies past him. Izuku grits his teeth, shaking his head as Koch-chan dives in for another hit, an explosion on the palm of his hand that Monoma easily deflects with one of his own. "Nice quirk," Monoma says, his voice projected so the audience can't hear. A screen hovering over the stands across from Izuku and his friends shows a close-up of Monoma's face as he smirks. "But mine's better," he says, ducking forward and slamming a hand into Koch-chan's chest, the motion exploding with pops of bright light. Izuku winces as Koch-chan goes skidding back, a hand pressed to his chest for a moment before he reorients himself. "I know how that one feels," he thinks. Koch-chan doesn't hesitate though, sliding back into a fighting stance. "Shut up," Koch-chan growls. "Can't you come up with your own hacking moves?" He snarls, before moving forward in a clear repetition of his earlier right hook. Izuku winces, but can't look away, and he blinks in surprise as Koch-chan drops his fist at the last second, turning the twisting momentum of his punch into a low side kick that hits Monoma square in his stomach as the boy dodges. Izuku sees the way Monoma leans over, coughing to catch his breath, and Koch-chan doesn't hesitate, lobbing an explosive punch at the other boy's face. The explosion covers the field for a moment, and Izuku strains, trying to see either of them among the bright pops of explosion and the dark smoke. He grits his teeth, literally on the edge of his seat. "Is it over?" Uraraka asks beside him, and Izuku glances over to see that she's just as engrossed as he is. The field finally starts to clear, and Izuku blinks, reaching a hand to cover his mouth. Monoma and Koch-chan are right on the edge of the field, standing with the white tape beside them as they exchange punches and kicks. It's clear that Koch-chan is a better fighter, but Monoma has a grin on his face, and whatever he's saying right now isn't being projected. Koch-chan seems to be reacting to it, and Izuku sees the exact moment Monoma says something that pisses him off, and Isaac feels a hit of dread as Koch-chan swipes forward with a kick. Monoma laughs, dodging underneath Koch-chan's leg and giving him a firm shove in the back, his hands exploding as he does. Koch-chan lands on his feet, whirling around to hit him, but Izuku can see that his left foot is outside of bounds, just barely over the edge of the tape. Bakugo is out of bounds. Present Mix shouts, and Koch-chan jerks in surprise on the field below, explosions crackling out of his palms. Monoma wins. Koch-chan growls, loud enough that Izuku thinks he actually hears it over the crowd of the audience, but it could just be that he's seen that look on Koch-chan's face enough times that he knows what noise he'd make. He leaps forward at Monoma, his palms sparking and blasting, but the explosions suddenly end. Izuku can see Aizawa, walking up behind Koch-chan with his hair floating above his head. Koch-chan goes for Monoma anyway, and Aizawa's capture weapon shoots out to wrap around his arms, tugging him away. "I can't believe he lost to Uraraka," whispers, echoing Izuku's thoughts. What did Monoma say to him to get him so pissed off? "I can't imagine it's all that difficult to get that reaction out of Bakugo," Iida comments, and when Izuku glances over, there's a strange furrow to his brow. "I'm simply surprised that Monoma was able to get him out of bounds regardless of his emotional state. I think we all underestimated Monoma," Izuku says, swallowing. "I can't believe you're fighting him in the second round, aren't you, Deku?" Uraraka gives him a sympathetic look. "Do you think you'll be okay?" Izuku shrugs, anxiety prickling under his skin. From a couple of rows down, Kaminari twists in his seat, looking up to face them. "Oh, Midoriya will be fine," he chirps, a grin on his face. "Didn't you see how Monoma fought? He totally relied on Bakugo's quirk. Against someone like Midoriya, his all-fighting skill and no quirk, he's gonna get smoked." Kaminari gives Izuku a thumbs up. "I'm gonna get popcorn to watch that fight." Izuku blinks. "I don't know if I'm that good at fighting," he says, uncurling his fingers where they've been tightly wrapped around the arms of his chair. "He looked pretty good at it." "Are you kidding?" Uraraka elbows him. "Deku, you're one of the best in the class. I think only Ojiro and maybe Bakugo can compare, and they both have quirks to use." Izuku feels his face turn red, and he splutters to try and respond. "I'm not that good," he says, twisting his hands together and looking down at his lap. "I just practice a lot." "You train as much as Bakugo studies, dude," Kaminari chimes in. "I wish I had that kind of motivation. I'd be all buff and muscle-wire." He laughs, and Iida and Uraraka laugh along with him. After a moment, Izuku joins in, the words of his friends slowly uncoiling the tight anxiety in his chest. Izuku stands in the tunnel once again. It's becoming familiar, even though he's not on the same side of the field every time. The tunnels are identical, all smooth concrete walls over pressed dirt ground, and it's a constant with each of these fights. This time, he's on the one that has light spilling in from the angle of the afternoon sun. Izuku's standing with the tips of his shoes just inside of the shadow, the sunlight threatening to spill over and touch them. "Nervous?" Aizawa's voice doesn't surprise Izuku. He's leaning on the side wall of the tunnel, where Izuku thinks he's been since he finished carting Koch-chan away. Izuku wonders where Koch-chan is now, if he's calmed down. A little, Izuku admits, kicking at the ground. The edge of his shoe hits the light. Izuku thinks about last time's second round, when he lost in moments. He's hopeful that this won't be like that. Aizawa nods. Try not to let him get under your skin, he says, and Izuku stops fiddling with his feet to properly look at him. He's not that skilled in hand-to-hand, but he makes up for it by being clever. You'll be fine if you don't let him get in your head. Izuku nods, pressing his lips together in determination. I won't let him get to me, he promises, clenching his hands into fists at his sides. If I beat him here, Aizawa nods. You'll either be up against Todoroki or Kirishima for the semifinal. He glances over to the field. It's time, he says, and when Izuku follows his gaze, he can see Monoma stepping out of his tunnel, into the bright light. His blue-gray eyes seem already fixed on Izuku, a lazy smile on his face becoming more visible as he gets closer. Izuku turns, walking out onto the field himself. The bright light isn't as jarring this time, and he's not sure if it's from being used to it, or if it's because he's in the other tunnel. Monoma's definitely grinning at him, a wide smirk that makes Izuku's stomach twitch with nerves. They step into the ring, facing each other. For the second match of the second round, we have Izuku Midoriya from Class 1 against Nido Monoma from Class 1B. Present Mick's voice fills Izuku's ears, soothing him. He knows how this part goes. This is an interesting matchup, given that Midoriya is quirkless, and Monoma's quirk allows him to copy others' quirks. We'll be in for an entertaining fight for sure. Ready? Izuku settles into a fighting stance. Just like in his match with Koch-chan, Monoma doesn't shift, still standing normally with a confident smile. Start. Izuku moves immediately, mirroring Koch-chan's signature right hook. Monoma dodges it easily, and Izuku twists with the motion, spinning around to hit Monoma in the side with a back kick that strikes him hard, the ball of Izuku's foot contacting him with force. Izuku grins when he sees Monoma wince, his smile faltering. Did you think I'd be an easy matchup? Izuku asks, sliding forward with an elbow strike that Monoma barely deflects, the palm of his hand sliding off of Izuku's uniform sleeve. On the contrary, Monoma hisses, moving in so he's closer to Izuku. You're the worst possible match for me, he says, throwing up a knee that hits Izuku on the hip bone. The pain is bright and quick, but it's nothing compared to what Izuku has felt before. Izuku sees an opening, an unguarded spot on Monoma's stomach, and he quickly strikes out with a fist, hitting the other boy in the center of his stomach. Monoma groans, stumbling back to hold his stomach, and Izuku uses the greater distance to whip a leg out, smacking Monoma in the side of his head. I'm glad you're aware of it, Izuku says back to him before he can think better of it. Fighting makes him bold, he thinks as he steps back, letting Monoma be the one to move in next. Bold words, Monoma says, rolling his eyes as he settles into a fighting stance. Coming from a quirkless guy. He grins, showing his teeth as he darts in, aiming a punch at Izuku's face. Izuku blocks it with a forearm. I'm quirkless, Izuku says, moving in to body slam Monoma, forcing him to step back or lose his balance. And I'm still going to beat you, Monoma hums. What if you're not, though? He asks, sidestepping out of the way of a kick Izuku throws at his chest. What? Izuku asks, ducking forward and kneeing Monoma in the chest. Monoma gets a hand between his chest and Izuku's knee, but Izuku still hears a pained grunt at the impact. What if you're not quirkless? Monoma says through gritted teeth. Do you even have the extra toe joint? I don't, Izuku replies, sliding back from Monoma. Why do you care? Monoma shrugs, his fist still ready to try and block Izuku at any moment. I can tell if someone has a quirk or not if I copied. Wouldn't you like to know for sure? Whether you're actually quirkless or not? He steps forward as he says it, throwing a kick that smacks Izuku in the side. Izuku hisses, sliding in to prevent him from being able to follow up with another kick. Because Monoma continues, even as he jerks his face out of the way of Izuku's backhand. If you have a quirk and you're still like this, doesn't that just mean you're useless? That there's no excuse for it, that you're worthless and weak all on your own. Izuku growls and shoots forward, his elbow cracking along Monoma's jaw with a satisfying sound. Shut up, he hisses as Monoma jerks back, a hand coming up to hold his jaw where it's already bruising. I don't care. You don't? Monoma asks, a strange light in his eyes. Why, are you afraid to know the truth? He steps forward, a hand outstretched like he's going to try and touch Izuku. Izuku bares his teeth at him and slides in, grabbing Monoma by the front of his uniform, flipping him over his shoulder and onto the ground, over the edge of the white tape. Monoma hits against the ground with a pained expression on his face, and Izuku stares down at him, as Present Mick announces his victory. I'm not afraid, Izuku says. It just doesn't matter to me. I beat you either way, so I guess I'm not really all that weak or useless. Izuku steps back, turning away before Monoma can respond. He walks back into the tunnel as the crowd cheers around him. Izuku isn't surprised to see Koch-chan waiting for him when steps out of Recovery Girl's office, the bruising on his knuckles and the shoulder muscle he hadn't even noticed healed. He's chewing on the fruit gummies she'd given him, telling him to rehydrate and rest up before his next match. He's not even really tired, actually, and it's kind of a strange feeling considering that for him, this was his fourth fight and not his second. This day has already stretched on so long for him, and he wonders if he adds up the hours, how long it really has been. Koch-chan is leaning against the wall across from the door as Izuku steps out, pushing the door closed behind him. It shuts with a soft click. His friend has changed into a tank top and shorts, still wearing the uniform training shoes. Deku, Koch-chan says, his voice low but not quite angry, not yet. Izuku can see a bandage on his upper arm, where there must be a burn from his fight with Monoma. Izuku wonders if Koch-chan had refused to have it be healed, or if Recovery Girl had chosen to spare his stamina. Koch-chan, Izuku replies, stuttering like he's in middle school. He hates that he still does that, when he's nervous or surprised. How the heck did you beat him? Koch-chan asks, pushing himself off of the wall and stalking forward, toward Izuku. How the heck did you beat him when I couldn't? Izuku blinks. It was a bad matchup for him, he explains, holding up his hands in a preemptive surrender, as Koch-chan gets closer to him. Your quirk is so powerful, so it helped him beat you, but did you use yours? Koch-chan demands, grabbing the front of Izuku's uniform. Did you use your secret hacking quirk to beat him? Izuku brings a hand up, holding Koch-chan's wrist. His muscles are tense under the skin, and Izuku can feel his tendons, the bones of his wrist. I can't use it in the middle of combat like that, Izuku says, shaking his head. It's not something that would give me an advantage in that fight. Koch-chan's eyes narrow, the red of his eyes is glinting like rubies in the light. You better not be hecking lying to me, Deku, Koch-chan growls, but it's not the same as when he growled in middle school, not the same as the beginning of the year. Or else I'll kill you. Izuku can't help himself, a snort of a laugh escaping him at that. He sees Koch-chan's face twist as he snarls. You don't think I could hacking do it? Koch-chan hisses, and Izuku shakes his head, still trying not to laugh outright. No, it's not that. He answers, smiling despite himself. It's an inside joke, he says, the excuse sounding weak even to him, but Koch-chan sighs and releases his grip on Izuku's shirt. You're hacking weird, Deku, he says as he turns and walks away, stomping slightly. Izuku shakes his head, still grinning at his internal joke as he follows. Izuku stands in the tunnel, once more. He can see Endeavor again, talking to Todoroki in the shade on the other side of the field. He doesn't have to hear what they're saying to know it's nasty, judging by the way they gesture and what he remembers from the last time. It's unreal to Izuku that he's made it to the semifinals at all, and something about it makes him feel odd, like he shouldn't have made it this far. He can remember his complete defeat at Todoroki's hands last time, and it makes him nervous, but he has a plan. It's not pretty and it's not polite, but Izuku thinks it just might work. He steps out onto the field, not hesitating. Listening to the sounds of the audience as he and Todoroki approach each other, he traces his eyes over Todoroki's face, over the furious set to his jaw, and the glint of pain in his eyes. Izuku feels bad for what he's planning, considering how upset Todoroki already looks. For the first match of the semifinals, we have two students from Class 1A. Izuku Midoriya, an underdog who's blown away all of our expectations with his decisive victories in his first two matches, will be facing off against Shadow Todoroki, who has absolutely destroyed both of his opponents thus far. President Mick sounds excited for their fight. I'm looking forward to seeing this one, personally. Ready? Izuku makes eye contact with Todoroki, then, in a move he's never practiced but has thought about for the past few minutes, blinks rapidly, rolling his eyes back and up. Start. President Mick calls, and Izuku lets himself drop to the ground, falling like he's just gone limp forward. He hears an uproar from the audience as he hits the ground, hears Todoroki move forward. Midoriya Izuku can hear that same panic in his voice that he did in the bathroom both of those times, and he feels guilty when he opens his eyes and reaches up, grabbing the front of Todoroki's sports uniform, and yanking him into a punch to the gut. Sorry, Todoroki, Izuku says, watching surprise and pain flit across Todoroki's face. But there was no way I was going to win without fighting dirty. Izuku hauls himself to his feet, throwing an elbow strike that collides with the edge of Todoroki's jaw. Todoroki growls, low and angry and feral, and he swings at Izuku with his right fist, ice already gathering on his knuckles. Izuku slides forward, into Todoroki's chest. The punch just misses him, but Izuku can still feel the icy burn of the cold surrounding Todoroki's arm. Izuku wonders if pissing him off will just make things worse for him, but quickly dismisses the idea. He's already mad, Izuku thinks as he slides in, keeping close to Todoroki, even as the other student tries to back away. His dad did that for me. When Todoroki tries to step back again, Izuku grabs onto the front of his uniform shirt and pulls himself in, so they're almost touching. It earns him an icy punch to the shoulder, but it's worth it when Izuku raises a knee up sharply, hitting Todoroki square in the crotch. He doesn't release him though, keeping close. Can't do that big wall of ice on me if I'm this close, can you? Izuku asks as he tips his head back, then slams his forehead into Todoroki's face. Their height difference means that the bone of his forehead hits right on Todoroki's nose, and Izuku can both feel and smell the wave of iron-hot blood that pours out from Todoroki's nose. Todoroki grunts, smashing a fist directly into Izuku's face. Izuku's nose crunches, sickening and gross, and Izuku squints his eyes against the sharp pain as his nose starts bleeding. Todoroki raises his right hand, and Izuku recognizes the movement of the air that means he's about to use his quirk. Izuku grits his teeth and reaches out, grabbing onto Todoroki's outstretched arm, just as a wave of sharp ice flows out from it, slicing the flesh on Izuku's legs, and slamming into him with bruising force. Izuku grits his teeth, trying to drag the match out. Todoroki asks, glaring at him behind his mismatched bangs. "You're not going to last long like that." He swings his right hand again, and Izuku rushes forward once more, tackling him. Izuku can feel himself shivering, but he thinks Todoroki might be shivering, too. "You're shivering," Izuku says, wrapping his fists in the fabric of Todoroki's uniform, and leaning forward to sink his teeth into Todoroki's shoulder, into the meat of where his neck beats his shoulder. Todoroki hisses, kicking at him and trying to pull him off, but Izuku digs his teeth in harder. Todoroki reels back, punching Izuku in the cheekbone with a hand that's coated in ice, and Izuku is thrown off of Todoroki, onto the ground. Izuku looks up at him, spitting out a piece of fabric he'd ripped off with his teeth. Todoroki stalks toward him, a grimace on his face. "I'm sorry about all of this," Todoroki says, stretching out his right hand. "But I have to give you credit. I don't think anyone expected you to last this long." He waves his hand, summoning a thick ice wall, but Izuku knows what to expect. He crochets down, like he's about to jump, just as the ice crystallized around him. It's thinner, weaker than that first attack last time through, and Izuku hopes it's because he's started to tire Todoroki out, and not because Todoroki is taking pity on him. "If you're so impressed by me," Izuku grunts, tensing his muscles and ripping himself free from the ice. It cuts into his thighs, bruises against his shoulders, and rips skin and fabric off of his back in a sunburst of pain that makes Izuku see stars in his vision. "Then take me seriously," he shouts, stumbling out of the ice and seeing Todoroki's white eyes, his surprised stare. "Stop holding back." Todoroki grits his teeth, raising his hand again, but Izuku charges at him, throwing himself into Todoroki. He ignores the way Todoroki's knee hits him in the arm, instead reaching to grab a handful of white hair, yanking on it. Todoroki grits his teeth, and Izuku feels the sharp pain of a punch to his ribs that makes him cough, sputtering. He looks down at the ground for just a second, and he sees blood there. "I'm bleeding more than I'd expected," he thinks as he looks up, yanking Todoroki's head forward by his hair, and kneeing him in the gut. There's not a lot of momentum behind it, and Todoroki barely flinches. "I'm not," Todoroki hisses, and that makes Izuku growl, loud and angry. "You are? Use your fire and stop playing around." Izuku smashes his head forward into Todoroki's once again, his skull colliding with Todoroki's already broken nose. "I might be weaker than you, but at least I'm taking this seriously." Izuku hisses, letting go of Todoroki's hair and dropping his hand, reaching for Todoroki's neck. Todoroki bats his hand away, anger burning in his eyes. "What makes you think this isn't serious for me?" Todoroki yells back at him, shooting a wave of ice that completely coats Izuku's left arm. Izuku can't bend his wrist or elbow, and the arm is nothing but a solid burning pain, but Izuku swings his arm like a club anyway, smashing the side of the frozen thing into Todoroki's head. "Because if you took this seriously," Izuku says, panting, "I'd have lost already." He shouts, shoving at Todoroki. This close, none of his hits have the power he really wants them to have, and he keeps getting hurt, but it's worth it for the look that spreads across Todoroki's face. "Fine," Todoroki says, his left side erupting in flame. "I'll give you what you want," he hisses, and all Izuku sees before he loses consciousness is a wall of bright orange fire. Izuku opens his eyes to a room with a white ceiling, neat tiles that repeat over and over again. He blinks in the light, pulling himself up into a sitting position and hissing when his head aches. Across from him, sitting in matching chairs, Uraraka and Tsuyu both startle, Uraraka almost jumping out of her chair. They're in the infirmary wing of the arena, Izuku realizes, blinking. He looks down at himself, sees numerous white bandages wrapped over angry red burns and purpling bruises. "Deku," Uraraka says, leaning forward. "How are you feeling?" Izuku blinks. "Not that bad, actually." He's surprised by it, but he's also exhausted. "Recovery girl must have already healed me," he realizes, glancing around. "Your match against Todoroki ended about 20 minutes ago," Ributsuyu says, like she can tell what he's thinking. "Recovery girl said you could watch the finals, if you were feeling up to it." Izuku nods, swinging his legs over the side of the bed and moving the blanket off of himself. He's still in his sports uniform, he notes, but he may as well not be for the damage the outfit has taken. It's in shreds on his arms and legs, and probably on his back too. "She said you need to come back right after," though Uraraka says, a worried tone to her voice. "You're pretty banged up." Izuku nods. "I can tell," he says, wincing as he stands up. Uraraka stands up, too, her chair squealing against the floor as it's moved back by the motion. She holds her hands out, like she expects him to fall. Izuku doesn't, although he notes absently that he feels detached from his body, from the whole situation. "It's a lot like when he lost last time, really." "I'm going to go call my mom," he says, pushing past Uraraka and Tsuyu and walking towards the door. "Wait," Deku. Uraraka puts a hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Izuku nods. "I'm just kind of out of it," he admits, giving her a small smile. "I'll be okay. Meet you in the stands." Uraraka nods, smiling. "Okay. Text me if you need help with anything, okay?" Izuku nods at her, and he turns and leaves, this time without being stopped. It's easy to slip into the janitor's closet again. It's easy to slit his wrists. He thinks bleeding out goes faster, too. As he waits, once again in the dark and the quiet, he wonders if he'll wake up with just a headache, or if it'll be worse. Either way, he thinks, this is my last chance. Izuku opens his eyes to a wave of nausea that makes him drop his spoon, just like last time. He slaps a hand over his mouth, quickly standing up from his seat in the mess hall. He can see everyone looking at him, but it's taking everything in him not to throw up right here, right now, so he ignores Uraraka shouting after him as he stands up quickly, knocking over his chair as he turns and runs from the building. He gets outside just in time to lean over into a bush, vomiting his just-eaten food into a bush beside the entrance to the mess hall. He gags on the taste, wrapping his hands around his stomach and squeezing his eyes shut as he retches, his stomach aching and burning. His head throbs, too, and Izuku peels one eye open to look at the vomit on the grass and leaves in front of him, relieved when he doesn't see any blood. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice isn't a surprise to Izuku, and Izuku looks up, wincing as his head protests the movement. Aizawa is walking to stand beside him, a concerned look on his face as he stretches out a hand to feel Izuku's forehead. "You're running a fever," Aizawa says, his lips twitching into a slight frown. "How long have you been feeling sick?" Izuku shakes his head, opening his mouth to reply. He's interrupted by Uraraka's voice as she comes running out of the mess hall and over to him. "Deku, what happened?" She blinks, clearly taking in the scene. Izuku gives her a weak smile. "Oh no, are you sick?" Izuku shakes his head. "I think I'm just nervous," he replies. "Uraraka, go inside and get him some napkins and a bottle of water," Aizawa orders, and Uraraka nods, running back into the mess hall. Aizawa sighs, looking Izuku over. "Do you usually get nauseous like this when you're nervous?" Aizawa asks, placing a hand on Izuku's upper arm, and carefully tugging him away from the bush and across the path to the other side of the building. Izuku lets him drag him over to the wall, and Izuku leans against it gratefully. His head is starting to feel a little better, but his stomach feels like a rock in his gut, a point of pain that pulses with his heart beating. Sometimes Izuku answers, taking a deep breath. He hears footsteps. "Here," Uraraka says, softly. "Deku, how are you feeling?" Izuku hums. "Better, I think." He blinks his eyes open when he feels the scratchy surface of a napkin wipe along his jaw. He sees Aizawa, wiping his face clean with an impassive expression, when Izuku can't read. He pulls back, tossing the napkin in a nearby garbage can that flanks the door to the mess hall, then takes another napkin and pours a small amount of water on it. Izuku lets him set a gentle hand on Izuku's cheek, turning his face up slightly, so that Aizawa can wipe his face with the cool, clean napkin. Izuku swallows, shutting his eyes for just a second. He feels like a child, but he doesn't protest. Aizawa pulls back, and Izuku opens his eyes again. "Drink," Aizawa orders, passing Izuku the open bottle of water. Izuku complies, sipping at the water. It soothes his throat where it feels raspy and raw, and it feels cool and nice in his stomach. Izuku sighs, pulling the bottle away from his lips when it's about half empty. Aizawa is staring at him, an assessing look on his face, and Izuku can see Uraraka hovering anxiously behind him. "I feel better," he says, and it's not a complete lie. He can feel that pounding headache and the sharp stomachache, still, but he doesn't feel like he did on that final try at the USJ. He thinks he could fight, even, as long as he pushes the pain aside. "Do you think it's a good idea for you to continue on in today's events?" Aizawa asks, making eye contact with him. "I'm trusting you to be honest with me here. If you don't think you can safely participate, nobody will think poorly of you." Izuku shakes his head. "I'm going to participate," he says firmly, meeting Aizawa's gaze. "I'm going to fight, and I'm going to do well." He isn't going to lose, not to Todoroki. He can't lose to him, not with how hard he's worked. "I can't be satisfied just making him use his fire because he's angry," he thinks, the thought he'd had since their last match. "I need to beat him." Aizawa tips his head slightly. "You're awfully confident," he says, reaching into his pocket and holding out a brightly colored packet with a spout on the top. "Here. It'll give you energy, but shouldn't upset your stomach." "Thanks," Izuku says, blinking and taking the jelly pouch. He looks back up at his teacher. "Have the matches been announced yet?" "They have," Uraraka says from behind Aizawa. "Are you sure it's a good idea for you to fight, though? You just threw up." "I'm okay," Izuku says, smiling at her. "Let me see the bracket," he says, and Aizawa steps aside so that Uraraka can show him her phone. Izuku blinks, then smiles. "I'm against Shinsu first," Izuku says, meeting her eyes. "Isn't that the kid with the purple hair you teamed up with last round?" She tips her head slightly, and Izuku nods. He sees Aizawa's face shift slightly from where he's still watching Izuku, and Izuku looks over at him. "Sensei, I don't think I'll need to fight dirty to win the first round," Izuku says, twisting open the jelly pouch and smiling. "But I won't hesitate to if I need to." Aizawa raises an eyebrow at him. "Okay." He narrows his eyes slightly at Izuku, but Izuku just pops the opening of the jelly pouch in his mouth and slurps loudly at him, still smiling. His stomach hurts and so does his head, but he thinks he can do it, this time. He has to. Izuku feels kind of bad when he steps into the ring with Shinsu, because he's pretty sure that in one of the earlier rounds, Shinsu had actually made it to the semifinals. To be fair, Izuku is having a hard time remembering, what with how many fights he's heard about at this point. It's as bright as always on the field, and the light stings Izuku's eyes slightly, worsening his headache. He swallows, the lingering taste of strawberry jelly in his mouth. For this match, we have two teammates from the Cavalry battle. Isatoshi Shinsu of General Studies up against Izuku Midoriya of the Hero Course's Class 1A. This is sure to be an interesting match to watch, considering these two were part of the surprise third-place steal last round. Present Mick laughs, and Izuku sighs internally. It won't be interesting, Izuku thinks, because I'm the worst possible matchup for Shinsu right now. I knew I shouldn't have worked with you, Shinsu says, venom in his voice. You were dead weight in the Cavalry battle, anyway. Izuku doesn't reply, just takes a deep breath. Ready? Present Mick, same as always, calls for them to prepare. Izuku settles into a fighting stance, and Shinsu crosses his arms over his chest. Start. Present Mick calls, and Izuku ducks forward, aiming a punch at Shinsu's chest. It contacts strongly, striking Shinsu hard and causing him to grimace. Is that how this is going to go? Shinsu asks, stepping into a poor copy of Izuku's stance. You're going to pretend you haven't taken advantage of me? That you didn't team up with me just to learn how my quirk works to screw me over later? Shinsu throws a punch of his own at Izuku, but compared to training with Aizawa, it's laughably slow. Izuku ducks under, using the opening to hit Shinsu with an elbow to the ribs. God, I'm going to lose to a hacking quirkless person, aren't I? Shinsu says, voice strained as he moves away from Izuku. What an embarrassment. I don't think they should allow people with your condition to compete at all. It's not like you'll be able to be a hero. Izuku bites down on his tongue, stopping himself from replying, because even though he knows Shinsu is just trying to get on his nerves, it still hurts. Izuku steps back for a second, sliding forward to throw a kick that makes Shinsu lose his balance. He's smart enough to step to the side instead of back, at least, avoiding stepping over the tape. Why do you get to be in the hero course? Shinsu spits, stepping forward and punching at Izuku's face. Why are you so special? You're quirkless. Izuku dodges the punch, grimacing at the look on Shinsu's face. What is it that makes it so you get this? Shinsu gestures at him, a desperate look on his face. What's so hacking special about you? Why are you so important? I don't get it. Even the stupid monkey and the glittery guy teamed up with you, and for what? Izuku knees Shinsu in the gut for that one, and he doesn't feel that bad when he hears Shinsu gag on impact. Why do they care about you? Shinsu asks, panting. Izuku can hear the pain in Shinsu's voice, and it breaks his heart. I need to end this, he thinks, grabbing a hold of Shinsu's shirt and flipping him over his shoulder, just like he did with Monoma. It's easier, with Shinsu. Izuku winces in sympathy as Shinsu strikes the ground, out of bounds. Shinsu is out of the ring. Present Mick shouts. Midoriya wins. The crowd erupts in cheers. Izuku takes a deep, steadying breath, then offers a hand to Shinsu. It's not me, he answers, his hand steady, even as Shinsu's breath hitches sharply. They're the ones who are special. They're nice to me because they're just that good. Shinsu snorts, slapping his hand away and sitting up, looking away from him. Then why you? He asks, so quietly that Izuku doesn't think he's supposed to hear. Why you and not me? Izuku swallows the lump rising in his throat, trying to find the words to say to Shinsu as he stands and stalks towards his tunnel, shoulders hunched. Izuku stares after him, feeling lost. Midoriya. Izuku turns to see Aizawa waiting for him, hands in his pockets. How are you feeling? He jerks his head to the tunnel, then starts to walk. Izuku follows him. Fine, Izuku replies. He watches his teacher's back. Sensei, Shinsu, I know, Aizawa replies. The entrance exam is highly illogical, he says as they step into the shadow of the tunnel. It results in a number of students with high potential being overlooked. Shinsu is one of those cases. It's not fair, Izuku mutters, kicking at the ground. He's right. He deserves to be in the hero course more than I do. I wouldn't say that, Aizawa says, opening the door into the building and holding it open for Izuku, looking back at him with an arched brow. It's certainly unfair, but the practical exam was also biased against you, he says as Izuku steps through the door into the cool air-conditioned hallway. You earn your place in Class 1A. Izuku stops in the hall, watching as Aizawa walks in after him. That doesn't help Shinsu any, though, Izuku says, twisting his hands together. It's not right. Aizawa blinks, slow and even. It isn't. But general studies students can transfer into the heroics course if they make a good enough impression during the sports festival, he says, tilting his head slightly to the side. Shinsu has, at the very least, caught my attention. Izuku blinks. He's going to be in our class? He asks, a smile tugging at his lips. Aizawa sighs, turning and continuing down the hallway. That's not what I said. You need to eat something before your next match, he says, and Izuku scrambles after him. You'll be up against Yorozu. The tunnel is quiet this time, and Izuku is alone with his thoughts. Aizawa had pushed another jelly pouch and a bottle of water at him before disappearing, and Izuku's pretty sure he went to talk to Shinsu, judging by their conversation from before. Izuku's stomach has settled a bit, and he doesn't feel like he might throw up, but he can still feel it like a rock in his belly. His head is aching too, but only when he moves. All things considered, it's something he can handle. His stomach doesn't hurt as badly as his skin has before, when he was in middle school, and Koch-chan had burned him. His head doesn't ache quite as badly as it did when he got a concussion as Ace, fighting on the streets. He clenches his hands into fists. This is a battle I can win, he thinks to himself, staring out onto the field. This is something I have to win, if I want to beat Todoroki. He steps out into the field, the familiar sounds of the audience's chatter as he steps into the ring. Yororozu steps out of her tunnel just as he steps into place, and she looks nervous as she takes her place, facing him. "Good luck, Midoriya," she whispers, smiling faintly at him. Izuku returns the grin. "You too, Yororozu," he replies, and she nods. "For our next match," President Mix says, "just like always, we have 2 students from Class 1A. Izuku Midoriya will be facing off against Momo Yororozu. These two both did exceedingly well in their first matches, so I'm excited to see them face off against each other. Ready?" Izuku slides into his familiar fighting stance, and across from him, Yororozu does the same. "Start." President Mix shouts, and Izuku slides forward before Yororozu has a chance to use her quirk. "This might be the only chance I get," he thinks as he swings forward a strong knee strike that Yororozu barely manages to block before she jumps back, running to the side as her quirk sparks and ripples along her arm, as she starts to pull out a long metal rod. Izuku grits his teeth and pivots on his foot, spinning his leg around to sweep at her feet as she moves. She stumbles for a second, catching herself with her newly made staff, just as Izuku lurches forward and punches her in the jaw. "Sorry," he grits out between his teeth as she swings down, her staff contacting his forearms with a painful clang as he blocks the shot. The metal is hard and solid, not hollow, and Izuku notes that it's got to be heavy. Yororozu turns it, swinging at Izuku's legs, and Izuku realizes she's not trained to fight with it, not like some of the people he's seen on the internet are. Izuku easily slides out of the way of her low strike. Izuku twists, launching a kick that hits right where Yororozu's right hand is on the staff, where her fingers wrap around the metal. The force of it is enough that it stings Izuku's foot even through his shoe, and he winces in sympathy as Yororozu yelps, stepping back and dropping the staff. Izuku can see that her right hand is red, and her middle and index fingers are bent strangely, and he grimaces, stepping back for a second. She doesn't wait though, reaching with her left arm to pull something out of her arm, a long thin blade with a grippy handle. Izuku grins. "A knife?" he asks as she holds it up, leveling it at him. "A knife," she confirms, moving into a fighting stance. Izuku copies her, his eyes darting to the staff on the ground. She must catch his gaze, though, because she kicks it, sending it skittering out of bounds before he can even plan his move to grab it. "Smart," he says, giving her a smile, and she returns it before stepping forward at him, swiping the knife through the air. Izuku leans back, out of her range, then slides in as she moves her hand back. He whips a back fist out, hitting the inside of her wrist, and the knife goes clattering to the ground. He moves quicker, this time, twisting out of the way of Yororozu's kick as he rolls on his shoulder, grabbing the knife as he somersaults across the ring. He hops to his feet with the knife in hand, glancing at the tape just behind him. He moves forward, just as Yororozu pulls another, longer knife from her arm, holding it up and gritting her teeth at him. Izuku steps back, into the range he's trained at, but it doesn't seem Yororozu has the same training, because she steps forward before she swipes at him. Izuku sees the swipe coming, and it's weeks of training with Aizawa that move his arm, his knife hand darting forward to slice along the back of Yororozu's hand, before he can think about it. She drops the knife, a spray of blood coming from her hand, but the worst part is the way she screams, reeling back and holding her bleeding hand with her broken one. Izuku steps back, his eyes wide and hands shaking as he watches her cradle her hand. He can see the bones in the back of her hand through the cut, can't see the way her flesh hangs off of her skin. The audience murmurs around them. Yororozu swallows visibly, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I give up," she sobs, and Izuku drops his knife, stepping toward her. She flinches back as he reaches out, and Izuku jerks back. "I'm sorry," Izuku says, but Yororozu turns away from him. Aizawa comes from behind her, setting a hand on her shoulder and leading her toward the tunnel she came from. He gives Izuku a meaningful glance, and Izuku blinks before following after them. Yororozu doesn't say anything, just stares at her hand as Aizawa leads her into the shade of the tunnel. Izuku can hear his own heart beating, hard and fast in his throat as he follows them. Aizawa glances back at him every so often, so Izuku knows that he knows he's following, but his teacher doesn't say anything. Izuku darts forward when they get to the door, pushing it open for them and stepping inside to hold it open. As Yororozu steps forward into the light of the hallway, she looks at him, blinking tears out of her eyes. "It's okay, Midoriya," she says, hiccuping. "It's my fault for underestimating you." Izuku shakes his head. "I went too far," he says, following them again as Aizawa grabs Yororozu's shoulder and steers her along, towards where Izuku knows the infirmary is. The Cavalry girl opens the door for them when they get there, holding it open for them with a grim look on her face. Izuku watches the way her gaze sticks to Yaoyorozu's hand as they walk in, just like Izuku's gaze keeps sticking on the trail of blood going down the hallway. I did that, he thinks as they walk into the infirmary. You two, wait out here, a Cavalry girl orders before ushering Yaoyorozu into a room and shutting the door behind them. Izuku feels like things are moving more quickly than they should, like his brain is skipping beats. He covers his mouth with a hand as a wave of nausea rises in his throat, and he barely makes it to the tiny trash can by the door before he's throwing up again, knees on the hard tile as he retches. He hears Aizawa sigh above him. Are you still feeling sick, or is this from what just happened? Aizawa asks, and when Izuku looks up to him, he's holding out a handful of tissues. Izuku takes them, wiping his face clean. Both Izuku says, grimacing at the taste in his mouth when he drops the tissues into the garbage can. What is she? Don't. Aizawa cuts him off. There's no point in wondering until we know. You did exactly what someone should in a knife fight. These tournaments are dangerous. Everyone knows that. You knowing how to use a knife isn't any different from others having quirks. Aizawa meets Izuku's gaze as he straightens up. I know, Izuku sighs. But if I hurt her for real, he shakes his head, biting his lip. I'll have to reset, if that happens, he thinks, but I don't think I'll be able to keep going. I don't think I can compete if I reset again. But I can do that to her, not just so that I can win, I can be the reason someone else can fight. Midoriya, Aizawa says sharply, and Izuku looks up at him. Stop thinking about it. He grabs the sleeve of Izuku's uniform and drags him the short distance to a row of chairs against the wall, tugging him down until he sits. Aizawa sits in the chair next to him, and Izuku forces himself to take a deep breath as he grips onto his knees, digging his fingers into his flesh. He can see the way his knuckles go white, can feel the pain in his knees from it. Aizawa swats at his hands, not touching them but coming close. Stop that, he orders, and Izuku relaxes his fingers, instead clenching his hands into fists. He can feel Aizawa's gaze on the back of his neck, prickling his skin. Izuku thinks he might throw up again. The door Yaoyorozu and her Cavalry girl went through opens with a soft click, and Izuku whips his head up to see her Cavalry girl peeking out, an unreadable expression on her face. You two can come in, she says. She wants to talk to you, Midoriya. Her Cavalry girl opens the door further, stepping out of the doorway and walking to her desk, her cane clacking on the tile. She stops, glancing over at Izuku. Oh, and before you go, I want to look you over, she says, settling into her chair. Don't think I didn't notice you throwing up, young man. Izuku nods, his face flushing slightly, and he stands up at the same time as Aizawa. Izuku wants to push past him, to get to the door first, but Aizawa is in his way, walking slow and calm to the door. Izuku follows, and he can't even see Yaoyorozu around his teacher for a second. He wants to scream. Midoriya. Yaoyorozu says as Izuku finally sees her, and he holds his breath, gaze catching on her hands. The one that had been broken is tinted yellow with half-healed bruising, and the other is swathed in white bandages, resting on an ice pack on her lap. Yaoyorozu looks tired, her hair coming loose from her ponytail in places, but she smiles at him. Are you? Izuku swallows. Is your hand okay? I'm so sorry, Yao. It's completely fine, she says, tipping her head slightly to the side and smiling. The Cavalry girl chewed me out for making a knife when I didn't know whether or not my opponent was proficient in them, but other than my pride, I'm completely okay. She looks down at her lap. I really should be apologizing to you, she says, and Izuku blinks. Why? He asks, shaking his head. I hurt you, he says, gesturing to her hand. She meets his gaze, face turning serious. I didn't take that fight as seriously as you did, she says, staring into his eyes. It was both irresponsible of me and rude to you. She holds up her bandaged hand. You're going to be an amazing hero, Midoriya. We were fighting, and when you hurt me, your first instinct was to make sure I was okay. She looks at him, a determined smile on her face. You are an inspiration for me to work harder, Midoriya. Izuku blinks, his gaze dropping to her hand. You really okay? He asks, voice small. She nods, smiling still. I'm really okay, she says, and Izuku breathes a sigh of relief. That was very mature of you, Aizawa says, and Izuku sees him nod to Yaoyorozu. Her Cavalry girl was right, by the way. You should always be cognizant of the fact that anything you make can be used by your opponents. Yaoyorozu nods, looking sheepish. I know, it was stupid of me, Midoriya, Aizawa says, looking to him. Izuku jumps a little, looking up at him. Yes? He chirps, hating the way his voice breaks a little. You did good, and Yaoyorozu is fine. She's told you she's fine. Stop beating yourself up over it. Aizawa reaches out, setting a hand on the top of Izuku's head. Got it. Izuku nods. Got it. He replies, face turning red. Yaoyorozu giggles, her laugh barely concealed behind her hand, and Izuku finds himself glad that he doesn't have to reset and lose this moment. Izuku stands in the tunnel, waiting for his fight with Todoroki for the third time. It's strange being here, and knowing what only he knows. Knowing which buttons he can press to piss Todoroki off and make him use his fire, but not what to say to help him, not what to do to win. It's nice, though, not having to go through another fight in order to face Todoroki. Izuku doesn't know if he'd make it through the semifinals if it wasn't Todoroki. He thinks he's been lucky to survive this far. Izuku isn't sure if he's surprised or not when Endeavor steps into his tunnel this time, instead of Todoroki's. The man is bright like a torch, even more so up close, and it takes a lot of Izuku's energy to not make a rude face at him as he walks up to Izuku. The crackling of his fire is loud in the relative quiet of the tunnel. Midoriya, right? Endeavor asks, his voice low and rough. I must say, I found your performance in your last fight quite impressive. It's painful to look at him, with how bright his fire is burning. Thank you, Izuku replies, looking down at the dirt below him instead. The shadows warp strangely in the flickering light. I have something to ask you, Endeavor says. How do you expect to become a hero, quirkless like you are? Izuku's head shoots up, and he searches Endeavor's face for malice, for a mocking look or a twist of disdain, but there's just disbelief. Confusion. Like Endeavor doesn't mean to be rude, like he just simply can't fathom the idea of Izuku, quirkless, being a hero. I don't expect to, Izuku replies, meeting Endeavor's teal gaze. I just will. There's no other future for me, he says, watching Endeavor's face twitch. I'm going to be a hero, or I'll die trying. His lips quirk up at the end, into a bitter smile, because he has already. Endeavor grunts. I wish my son took this as seriously as you did. Izuku feels his face twitch. What do you mean? He asks, before he can talk himself out of it. Shadow doesn't take his role seriously. If he's going to be number one, then he needs to. Endeavor starts to say, but Izuku cuts him off. He takes this more seriously than you think, Endeavor. Izuku grits his teeth, clenching his hands into fists at his sides. And with all due respect, if your son gets to be number one, it's not your accomplishment. It's his dot. The shadow wins. It will be because of my training, Endeavor says, his brows twitching in anger. He opens his mouth again, but Izuku starts speaking. If he wins, it will be despite you, Izuku growls, not because of you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a fight to win. Izuku turns on his heels, walking out into the sunlight before he has a chance to process what he just said. Todoroki looks angry, still, when he walks out into the sun, and Izuku can tell from the angle of his eyes that he's looking behind Izuku, to where Endeavor must still be looking. Don't look at him, Izuku growls, and Todoroki's eyes snap to his, anger still on his face, mixing with confusion. You're fighting me, dot. Todoroki tilts his head slightly, lips thinning into a frown. What did he say to you? He asks, voice low. For the first match of the semifinals, we have two Class 1 Hero Course students present, Mick says in the background. Izuku ignores him. Nothing important, Izuku replies, keeping his eyes on Todoroki's. Shadow Todoroki and Izuku Midoriya will be facing off for a spot in the finals. I'm sure you're all familiar with these two by now, so I'll skip the introductions. Izuku knows what's coming next. It's not hard for him to focus on the pain in his stomach for a moment, and he feels himself grow pale. He makes a show of blinking rapidly, reaching a hand up to rest on his forehead. He sees Todoroki blink in surprise. Ready? Izuku flutters his eyes, rolling them back in his head. Start. Izuku drops to his knees, then to the ground, and he hears that same gasp from the audience, the grit of the ground under Todoroki's sneaker. Midoriya. He shouts, and Izuku can tell he's right there. Izuku opens his eyes, grabbing the front of Todoroki's shirt and pulling him in, his face centimeters from Izuku's. Sorry, Todoroki, Izuku says, punching him in the gut. Todoroki hisses, his breath hitting Izuku's face. We both know I don't stand a chance against you in a fair fight. Todoroki pulls back as much as Izuku lets him, his lips turn in a snarl. Did he pay you to do this? Todoroki spits, anger flashing through his features. Are you kidding me? Izuku asks, pulling himself to his feet using his grip on Todoroki's uniform front. All he did was piss me off, he says, cocking his shoulder back for a second, before throwing an elbow strike that Todoroki dodges. It breaks Izuku's grip on Todoroki's shirt, and Todoroki tries to slide back, but Izuku keeps close. He dodges the punch. Todoroki tries to aim at his stomach. I'm used to his fighting style, Izuku realizes as he blocks a knee strike. This is easier than last time. Todoroki growls, and Izuku feels the creep of ice up his left arm as he tackles Todoroki, throwing them both to the ground, and out of the way of the wall of ice that grows and swells behind them. Todoroki is under Izuku for just a second, and Izuku takes advantage of it, punching Todoroki in the face as he pushes Izuku off of him. Izuku lands awkwardly on the ground, but he has a moment to gather himself as Todoroki winces, a hand coming to his nose. I guess it's inevitable that he ends up with a bloody nose, Izuku thinks as he lurches to his feet. Todoroki stands up across from him, a dangerous glint in his eye. Todoroki raises his right hand, a swath of blue ice rippling across the field. Izuku grits his teeth, jumping into the air as the ground under his feet freezes into ice spikes, and he lands awkwardly, the ice still growing around him. He can feel his ankle roll, can feel the ice slicing the skin around his ankles, but he ignores the pain, trying to yank his feet free. They're embedded, though, and Izuku bites his lip. You talk a big game, Todoroki says, walking toward him with his right hand still outstretched, frost gathered on his fingertips. But you don't actually stand a chance against me. It's impressive you've lasted as long as you have. Izuku grits his teeth, pulling his injured foot out of his shoe and out of the ice. He steps onto the jagged, icy ground, ignoring the discomfort, and rips his other foot out of his shoe. Want to bet? Izuku says, settling into a fighting stance in his bare feet. Todoroki watches him, face impassive. A trickle of blood runs from his nose, gathering on his lip. You're the one bleeding, Todoroki. Izuku grins as Todoroki's eyes narrow, and Izuku darts forward as Todoroki starts to use his quirk again, ice gathering on the ground as Izuku runs. The ice pulls the skin off from the bottoms of his feet, but he runs anyway. He throws a punch at Todoroki's face, one that the other boy easily blocks, but Izuku doesn't stop, knocking his head forward into Todoroki's nose, just like last time. He hears Todoroki's breath hitch in surprise and pain, and Izuku reels back just enough to meet Todoroki's eyes. I'm giving this everything I've got. Why aren't you? He asks, and he knows he doesn't need to elaborate. Todoroki's eyes narrow into a glare as he steps back, moving away from Izuku. Izuku lets him. I'm going to win without using his quirk, Todoroki says, raising his hand and summoning a mass of ice that charges at Izuku, fast. By rising to the top without using it, I'll have denied him everything. Izuku growls, dodging to the side and ignoring the way a spike of ice slashes into his side, hot blood flowing from the wound as he runs at Todoroki again. Todoroki looks surprised, almost, and Izuku can see the shivers running up his arms. It's time, he thinks. I might lose again, but it's time. You're not your father. Izuku screams, throat raw. Todoroki blinks, stepping back and clenching his hands into fists at his sides. And you're not your quirks. You're a person. Izuku raises his right hand in front of him, his fist shaking from exertion as he holds it up, a challenge. Todoroki grits his teeth, rushing forward, but Izuku dodges easily, shoving Todoroki away with an elbow. The ice sack creeps up his arm, stings, but Izuku ignores it. I'm not going to use his power, Todoroki hisses, shaking his head. I'm not going to be like him. Izuku reaches forward, grabbing the front of Todoroki's shirt again, and Todoroki flinches back. Izuku keeps his grip on the fabric though, and he can feel the way Todoroki is shaking. It's not his power, Todoroki, it's yours. The only person you're hurting right now is yourself. Izuku takes a deep breath, staring into Todoroki's white eyes. Use your fire, Izuku says, lips quirking up into a smile. You fire. Not his. He squeezes his hand where it's twisted up in the fabric of Todoroki's shirt. Todoroki shoves him away, and Izuku doesn't have the strength to react, letting himself be shoved a few steps back. Todoroki takes a deep breath, and orange flames erupt from his left side, burning away the thin frost that had gathered on his skin. Izuku has to blink against the bright glow, his face stinging from the heat. Why are you doing this? Todoroki asks, barely visible through the fire. Don't you want to win, too? Why are you trying to help me? Izuku grins. Isn't that what heroes do? He asks, and he sees Todoroki's lips crack into a smile. Yeah, he says, smile audible in his voice. I want to be a hero too. He raises his left hand, fire crackling around it. I'm not responsible for what happens to you next. Izuku laughs, stepping forward. What do you mean? He asks, flames rising around him. I'm still going to win, he says, flinging himself directly into Todoroki's blast, the fire whipping around him, hot and burning. Izuku can feel his skin bubbling up, peeling off, but he moves forward anyway. I have to do this before I lose consciousness, he thinks, twisting back and throwing the strongest punch he can. His knuckles collide with Todoroki's jaw, hard, and Izuku can only hope it was enough. He feels the flames full around him, but he can't see, and it takes him a moment to realize that he'd shut his eyes, at some point. There's a roaring in his ears that he thinks might be the audience, but he can't tell if they're cheering for him or Todoroki. Izuku tries to take a step, tries to move, but shifting his weight is enough to make him stumble. He cracks an eye open to see the sky above him as he falls, his head knocking against the hard ground with a crack before he loses himself to darkness. Izuku opens his eyes to the familiar sight of the infirmary ceiling. He stares at the white tile for just a moment before sighing, pressing his eyes shut again. The realization settles into his stomach like cement, a slow, painful knowledge. His head hurts, and he can feel tears starting to fill his eyes. Deku? Uraraka's voice makes Izuku blink his eyes open again, turning his head to see her sitting at his bedside, Todoroki and Yaoyorozu beside her. Izuku blinks the tears out of his eyes, sitting up. You're awake, Todoroki says, his expression unreadable. There's a dark bruise on the underside of his jaw, a purple and blue mark where Izuku must have hit him. His nose is mostly healed, with a yellowing edge to the bruise. The blood has been wiped away. Izuku looks at him, bites his lip. I lost you again, he says, unable to keep the sadness out of his voice. Todoroki tilts his head slightly, his right brow raising the tiniest bit. Again? He shakes his head. You won, Midoriya. He looks down, and Izuku follows his gaze to where Izuku's hand rests on the bedspread. Izuku can see healing bruises and burns there, his skin shiny and red, like a bad sunburn. I won? He asks, his voice sounding small. He takes a moment to look over himself. He's wearing scrubs, something recovery girl must have given him, and he's wrapped up in bandages. He can feel his burns, can feel where the skin has been taken off the bottoms of his feet, but when he presses a hand into his side, the cut there is mostly healed, and he feels better than he should, all things considered. Yeah? Uraraka pipes up, a bright grin on her face. You knocked him out all like she mimes a punch in the air, and then you stood there all burnt and stuff, and just like, stared up at the sky and passed out. She looks at him, her smile dropping into something softer. You worried all of us up in the stands, you know. Sorry, Izuku says, blinking and glancing around the room. How long have I? Not long, Yorozu says. Recovery girl wanted to wait until you'd woken up to finish healing you. I can go get her now, if you want. She tips her head. Izuku nods. Yes, please. He replies, smiling at her. Yorozu nods, standing up from her seat and brushing off the front of her uniform before turning and opening the door, stepping into the next room. Did I really win? He asks, looking down at his hands. It feels unreal, after all of these tries. Like a joke. Uraraka says. You've still got the finals, though. Izuku looks up at her. Has the other semifinal happened yet? He asks, anxiety and excitement mixing in his throat. Who's it between? You haven't been paying attention to that. Todoroki asks, tipping his head slightly to the side. It hasn't started yet, no. They had to repair the field after our fight. He smiles faintly, looking down at his hands. It's between Monoma and Bakugo, by the way. Izuku blinks, because he knows how that fight goes. Oh, he says, just as there's a knock at the door. Izuku startles, turning to see Recovery Girl stepping inside, Yorozu close behind her. Now Recovery Girl says, walking up to Izuku's bed. How are you feeling, young man? Uraraka and Todoroki scoot their chairs to the side, letting Recovery Girl get right up to his bedside. Izuku gives her a polite smile. Much better, thank you. He chirps, and she tsks at him. If this is your idea of much better, your pain tolerance is something else, sonny. She sighs, leaning forward and kissing him on the forehead. He feels a layer of pain evaporate from his body, and he sighs in relief, even as the thick exhaustion sets in. Thank you, he breathes, and she hums in acknowledgement. You'll need to rest and eat before your next match, she says, reaching into her pocket and pulling out a handful of brightly colored gummies. Eat these, and a full meal if you can stomach it. I haven't forgotten that you've been doing this all while sick. Izuku feels his face flush red. You're sick? Todoroki asks, blinking, and Izuku shrugs. Not really, he says, and Uraraka snores from her spot beside Recovery Girl. Deku threw up after lunch, she says, a mixture of exasperation and worry in her voice. And he still wanted to compete, so as always sensei let him. After your final match, I want to see you back here, Recovery Girl says, leveling him with a stare. Although I wouldn't be surprised if you ended up being carried back here, considering what happened last round. She shakes her hand, still holding the gummies, and Izuku flushes red, cupping his hands and taking them from her. Can he watch the other semifinal? Uraraka asks, and Recovery Girl turns to look at her. Of course, dearie. Just make sure he eats and doesn't jump around. He'll want his stamina. She turns to look at Todoroki, next. Will you let me heal the rest of that, now? Todoroki nods, looking down at the ground, and Recovery Girl smooches him too. Izuku watches the bruises evaporate off of his face and all. Watching Recovery Girl's quirk in action is always impressive. Why didn't you get it healed before? Izuku asks, the words out of his mouth before he can think better of it. Todoroki blinks up at him, but it's Uraraka answers for him with a laugh. He wanted to be here when you woke up. She chirps, giggling. Isn't that sweet? I'm the one who injured him, Todoroki says, his tone defensive. It's only fair. His cheeks are tinted slightly red, though, and when Uraraka laughs, Izuku joins in. Izuku settles into his seat in the stands, his new sports uniform feeling soft and clean against his skin. Recovery Girl had given it to him to change into, and it's nice to be in something new after all of these fights and resets, even if it is identical to the last one. He's glad she'd given him a long-sleeved one, too, although he supposes she probably saw his scars. He's not really sure, the burns might have hidden them. When he was changing, he'd struggled to find them on his skin, so maybe she hadn't noticed. Uraraka plops into the seat next to him, juggling 2 large containers of popcorn. The salty, buttery smell drifts towards Izuku's nose, and he flushes red when his stomach grumbles loudly. Hungry? Uraraka asks, giggling. This one's for you, since RG said you need to eat, she says, passing him one of the containers. The outside of the paper bag is warm, the heat seeping through the material into Izuku's fingers. RG? He asks, sticking a piece of popcorn in his mouth. It melts on his tongue, delicious in the way things only are when he's really, really hungry. Recovery Girl, duh. Uraraka says, grinning. Izuku looks up past her as he sees Todoroki picking his way down the aisle. He stops in front of Uraraka and Izuku, staring. Hey Todoroki. Izuku smiles. Did you want to sit with us? Todoroki blinks. Yes, he says, walking past Uraraka and Izuku to sit on Izuku's other side. He sits in the chair gingerly. Izuku wonders how someone so powerful can be nervous about something like this. This should be easy for Bakugo, Uraraka comments as Izuku angles his bag of popcorn, offering some to Todoroki. Todoroki shakes his head no, and Izuku hums, looking over at Uraraka. I don't know, he says, trying to sound like he hasn't seen the fight before. Monoma's quirk lets him copy others' quirks, right? Koch-chan's quirk will be useful in one-on-one combat like this, even if Monoma isn't used to it. He bites at the skin of his lip, ripping off a small piece of it as he glances down at the field. Neither Koch-chan nor Monoma are visible right now, and Izuku would guess they're waiting in the tunnels. Well, I'm rooting for Monoma, Araka says, leaning back in her seat and propping her feet up on the seat in front of her. I want you to win, Deku, and no offense, but Bakugo is basically the worst possible match for you. Izuku laughs nervously. I want Koch-chan to win, he admits. I don't know if I want to fight him, though. I think you'd beat Bakugo, Todoroki says, serious. You're both skilled at hand-to-hand, but he relies on his quirk, and in battle training you prove that you know his fighting style well. He pauses. You knew mine, too. Did you review the tapes in preparation? Izuku blinks. He swallows nervously. I didn't really know your style, I just guessed, I think. He shoves a handful of popcorn in his mouth, hoping it'll keep him from saying anything stupid. Your battle instincts are impressive, then Todoroki says, still looking at him. Izuku feels his face turning red, and he smiles at Todoroki with his teeth covered, still chewing on his mouthful of food. Look, Araka breathes. They're starting. Izuku whips his head, watching as Monoma and Koch-chan step onto the field. They're on opposite sides from last time, so Izuku can't see Koch-chan's face, as blurry as it is from this distance. It looks like he's either smiling or snarling. Probably a combination of both. Alright, listeners. It's finally time for the second semifinal. President Mick calls, and Izuku feels himself shiver, slightly. He's not sure if it's anxiety or excitement. This semifinal will be between Katsuki Bakugo of Class 1A and Nido Monoma of Class 1B. Whoever wins will move on to the finals, where they will face off against Class 1A's Izuku Midoriya. Izuku flushes as President Mick says his name. I don't think any further introductions are necessary, not after the impression these two made in their other matches. Ready? Izuku watches Koch-chan crouch into his fighting stance. Monoma doesn't, of course. Izuku can tell he's making a mocking face at Koch-chan even from here. Start. President Mick calls, and Koch-chan rushes forward with the right hook. Izuku grips his fingers on the popcorn bag, crinkling the paper as he leans forward, biting at his lip. You can't do that. He thinks that Koch-chan as Monoma easily dodges the hit. You have to do something surprising, or he beats you. Koch-chan growls, the enhanced image on the TV hanging above focusing in on the curl to his lip, the almost feral look he gets. He slides in like he's going for another right hook, and Monoma dodges accordingly, ducking in and to the side, but Koch-chan's face twists into a vicious grin. His other hand shoots out, grabbing Monoma by the front of his uniform, and jerking him in as Koch-chan headbutts his face. Isn't that your move? Todoroki asks, a hand going up to touch his nose. Izuku blinks, watching Koch-chan move his right arm to fire an explosion into Monoma's stomach, one that makes the kid wince and stumble back, wiping blood from his nose. Kind of, Izuku mumbles, watching as Koch-chan sneers, giving Monoma the middle finger. You like that, you stupid bastard. Koch-chan says, his voice projected so the audience can't hear. Copy my quirk and fight me for real, acid. Izuku blinks. He wants him to copy his quirk. Uraraka asks, her mouth half full of popcorn. Wouldn't that make it harder for him? I think that's the point, Izuku says. He doesn't want to win unless he can beat Monoma at his best. It's been a theme for Koch-chan. He's never been willing to cheat on tests, to take things easy. Would Koch-chan think Izuku's quirk is cheating? Taking the easy way out. Monoma shrugs, and he reaches out and taps Koch-chan's extended arm, his fingers contacting his wrist. Don't mind if I do, he says, stepping back and watching as Koch-chan gets back into a fighting stance. Monoma flexes his hands, little explosions crackling off of his palms. He looks up at Koch-chan and grins, then Koch-chan is rushing in at him. Izuku watches, his eyes having a hard time tracking their motions as Koch-chan throws a kick that Monoma blocks with an explosion, only for Koch-chan to feint another right hook, and punctuate the movement with an explosion of his own, as he hits Monoma with an elbow instead. It's dizzying to watch, the field filling with dark smoke and flashing lights. Izuku can't even take his eyes off of them long enough to look down at his popcorn, and he gropes blindly at it without looking, so that he'll have something in his stomach for the next fight. There's an explosion that's different, bigger. Izuku can't see any of the ring, let alone the two fighting inside of it, but he can see the way Cementus and Midnight both step closer, grimaces on their faces. Izuku scoots to the edge of his seat, like those few extra inches will help him see. The smoke starts to clear, and it's on a very different scene from the end of the last fight. Monoma is on the ground, his body facing up and his hands wrapped around Koch-chan's ankle, where he's pressing one foot to Monoma's throat. Monoma's hands are smoking and crackling, matching Koch-chan's palms where they're held pointed at Monoma's face. Give up, Koch-chan growls, or I'll blow your ugly face off. Izuku can see that Midnight is shouting something to Koch-chan, but Koch-chan is ignoring her. Monoma struggles against Koch-chan's foot, coughing visible even from up in the stands. He releases a small burst of explosions into Koch-chan's leg, and Izuku winces, even though Koch-chan doesn't. He knows how much that would hurt. Monoma drops his hands and sighs. I give up, he says, the TV zooming in to show his face, smeared with ash and sweaty. Monoma has conceded. The victory goes to Bakugo, who will be facing off against Midoriya from his own class in the final round. President Mix shouts, and the audience erupts into cheers. Izuku finds himself joining in, screaming and clapping as he stands up from his seat, shoving his popcorn at Todoroki. We'll take a 1-hour break to allow the combatants to rest and heal before their match, and then it'll be time for our last match. President Mix says, whooping, and Izuku turns to Uraraka, smiling. Koch-chan did it. He shouts, over the cheers of the audience. Uraraka gives him a confused smile. Deku, you know you're going to have to fight him, right? She shouts back, and Izuku glances back down at the field. He could be imagining it, but it looks like Koch-chan is staring back at him from the way his face is tilted towards the stands. Yeah? Izuku shouts, breathless. I know. He can't help the swell of anxiety and excitement that rises in him, bright and buzzing. I don't know if I can beat him, Izuku thinks, but I already beat Todoroki. No matter how I do here, I'll surely have eyes on me for internships. He clenches his hands into fists, grinning. That doesn't mean I'm not going to try, though, Koch-chan. The prep room is quieter than Izuku likes. He wraps his hand around the water bottle he's holding, the plastic crinkling under his grip. He stares at the table in front of him, at his own blurry shadow. The door opens suddenly, slamming open with force, and Izuku flinches so hard he almost jumps out of his chair. He turns his head to see Koch-chan, starting in the doorway with a bewildered look on his face. Huh? Koch-chan leans out of the door. Why are you? He blinks, looking back to Izuku. Heck, this is prep room too. Izuku smiles, looking back at his water bottle and wrapping his hands around it. Hi, Koch-chan, he says quietly, and he hears Koch-chan breathe out loudly through his nose. Deku, Koch-chan says, stepping further into the room. You'd better not go hacking easy on me. I won't, Izuku replies, squeezing the water bottle and hearing it crackle. He doesn't look up at Koch-chan. You know what I hacking mean? Koch-chan snarls, slamming a hand on the table. Use your secret hacking quirk. Izuku glances up at him, blinks. I can't, he says, watching Koch-chan's brow twitch. It wouldn't help me in the middle of combat like that. He sighs. It'd make me more likely to lose, not less. Koch-chan narrows his eyes at him. You'd better fight me at least twice as hard as you fought stupid half and half, then. Don't be mad when I fight dirty, then Izuku says, looking up at him and smiling. Koch-chan smirks. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, you hacking animal. Koch-chan says, his voice a growl. His gaze lingers on Izuku. You really can't use it in combat. Izuku shakes his head. Not like this. Hey, Koch-chan, how did you beat Monoma? He asks before he can think better of it. Koch-chan's eye twitches and his smirk drops into a scowl. What the heck do you mean? You watch the damn fight. Koch-chan is growling as he stands beside Izuku. I mean, Izuku fumbles. You wouldn't have. He cuts himself off. Never mind. His heartbeat is too fast for him to come up with an explanation, for him to explain exactly how he knows that Koch-chan would have lost. Did lose. Koch-chan narrows his eyes. Hacking what, Deku? He snarls, then looks away. Are you going to make me hacking? Say it. Izuku blinks. Say what? Koch-chan's head whips back to look at him. That I was hacking inspired by your bullshit fight with Icy-hot, idiot. He blows air out his nose. Don't take it as a hacking compliment, he says, turning and stomping toward the door. You fight like a wild hacking animal, he snarls, opening the door and glancing back at Izuku. Don't hold back on me, or I'll kill your stupid ass right there. Izuku smiles at him and chuckles nervously. I wouldn't dream of it, Koch-chan. There's something different about standing in the tunnel, now that Izuku knows it's the last time. It's quieter, somehow, but he can also hear the chatter of the audience louder than ever. It crawls around the edges of his senses, a low buzz of conversation. Izuku prays that he's the topic of some of the talking, even though he hates the thought of the attention on him. Making it to the finals will surely be enough for me to get an internship, he thinks, right? He's alone in the tunnel this time, and he supposes it makes sense. Aizawa and all might have spoken to him plenty today, both this time through and the others. Koch-chan's mom and dad aren't here since they're not pro-heroes, and even if they were here, they wouldn't have any weird speeches to give to Izuku like Todoroki's father did. Izuku's known them since he was a child. Even if they haven't seen him in a few years, they know him, have known him since he was in diapers, and his and Koch-chan's mom took turns watching them so they could work. The tunnel is darker than last time, the shadows cutting sharper lines in the ground outside. Izuku thinks it's because the last remaining dregs of the morning fog have finally burned away, leaving the sun to shine unadulterated on the ground. Across the field, across the packed dirt and the familiar white tape, Izuku can't see Koch-chan. His childhood friend is alone in his tunnel, too. He's staring out at Izuku like Izuku is staring at him, his arms crossed over his chest, and his eyes so bright red that Izuku thinks they might be glowing. Izuku takes a deep breath, squeezing and unsqueezing his hands at his sides, then stepping forward into the sunlight. The bright light falls into his eyes, stinging them, but he keeps his gaze held high, watching as Koch-chan steps out, too. The sun makes his hair glow nearly white as they walk into the ring, facing each other in matching sports uniforms. Koch-chan. Izuku whispers, barely above a breath. Koch-chan tips his head to the side ever so slightly. Deku, he says, his tone as neutral as it gets. A light breeze blows through the stadium, brushing Izuku's hair against his forehead. For the final match of the first-year tournament, President Mick calls, dramatic and excited. We have Katsuki Bakugo and Izuku Midoriya from Class 1 of the Hero course. Now, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard these two are actually childhood friends. Izuku watches Koch-chan scowl. This match will be especially interesting because, as I'm sure you've heard by now, Midoriya is quirkless. Izuku starts at the mention of it. He sees Koch-chan's brows twitch. Midoriya defeated his first 3 opponents, using his strong combat skills and impressive instincts. Bakugo, on the other hand, has an incredibly powerful quirk, as I'm sure you've all seen. Koch-chan's eyes are red as he stares Izuku down. His quick control and his battle skills are impressive, especially for a first year. I'm personally on the edge of my seat already. President Mick chuckles. Well, with that said, are we ready? The crowd roars. Izuku bends his knees and raises his hands, settling into his fighting stance. Koch-chan does the same, his stance lower and closer to his body than Izuku's. There's already sweat glistening on the skin of his palms, visible where his fingers are curling into loose fists. Start. President Mick shouts, and Izuku is moving to dodge Koch-chan's right hook before the other boy even throws it. It's like tradition, Izuku thinks as he ducks to the side of the punch, blocking the knee strike Koch-chan throws along with it. Koch-chan whirls around to face him again, pointing a palm at him, and loosing an explosion that makes Izuku's hair whip around his face, and the heat sting his eyes. It's a smokescreen, though, and Izuku is familiar enough with Koch-chan's fighting to know that he'll slide in low, where the smoke is sinking to. Izuku slides back just as Koch-chan tries to sweep out his legs, and Izuku follows the movement with a punch that cracks against the side of Koch-chan's face, his cheekbone digging into the flesh of Izuku's hands. Izuku slides back from the hit when Koch-chan grins, holding his hands up and popping off small blasts from them. Are you hacking ready, Deku? He snarls, flexing his fingers. Izuku bites his lip and grins back at him despite the nerves bubbling in his chest. Are you, Koch-chan? Izuku replies, stepping his right foot forward and turning around completely to throw a hook kick that Koch-chan blocks with his forearm, stepping into Izuku's space to shove a palm into his chest. When am I not? Koch-chan asks as he explodes his hand into Izuku's skin. Izuku hisses, his feet grinding against the ground as the force of the blast pushes him back. He catches his balance just as Koch-chan steps toward him again, his hand smoking as he uses 2 blasts to balance himself as he throws a kick forward at Izuku. Izuku dodges in and to the side, elbowing Koch-chan in the ribs. Izuku can feel the wood of his body as he grunts, stepping back and glaring at Izuku. Izuku takes his chance, reaching in to grab Koch-chan's collar and yanking him in, smashing their foreheads together. You remember this move, Koch-chan? He says, breathless and laughing as he jerks his knee up to hit Koch-chan in the crotch. Koch-chan squeaks, jolting back and hissing in pain before shoving his hand at Izuku's collar, grabbing him so they're both holding each other. Don't hacking try me, Koch-chan grunts, throwing his head into Izuku's nose. Izuku laughs despite the hot pain that burns his eyes, taking the chance to shove his free hand into Koch-chan's gut in a strong punch that makes Koch-chan let go of him and step back. Izuku lets him, wiping blood off of his nose with his sleeve as he realizes, suddenly and wildly, that he's enjoying this thought. He steps in, throwing a kick that swings into Koch-chan's block, making his rival take a step to the side. Koch-chan growls, exploding a hand into Izuku's ankle, and it hurts, but Izuku finds he doesn't mind. He uses the opening to throw a kick that grazes Koch-chan's temple, leaving a red mark on the side of his forehead that matches the bruise already forming in the center of it. There's something different about this fight, Izuku thinks as Koch-chan dives forward, punching Izuku square in the chest. I'm not fighting for my life, and he twists closer, returning the punch with one of his own. He gets an explosion to the face for his trouble, one that leaves stars in his eyes that he has to blink away as he steps back. I'm having fun, he realizes as Koch-chan charges at him. Izuku steps out of the way, turning around and moving back to reposition himself in the center of the ring. Koch-chan is panting, a vicious grin on his face and a smear of dark ash on his cheek. You keep hecking dodging, Deku, Koch-chan says, laughing darkly. I'm going to hecking blast your brains out. Izuku grins back at him, swinging a foot forward and feinting at a kick. Koch-chan blocks it, leaving himself open for when Izuku grabs him at the waist and flips him over his shoulder, slamming him onto his back on the ground. You were saying? Izuku says, giggling as Koch-chan hisses at him. He starts to haul himself up, and Izuku stomps on his chest, just because he can. Koch-chan wraps his hands around Izuku's foot and fires off a stinging series of blasts, one strong enough that Izuku has to flinch back and hop away on one foot to gather himself, giving Koch-chan time to lurch to his feet, grinning with all his teeth showing. Desu hacking weight, Koch-chan growls, charging at Izuku with crackling palms. Izuku has time to brace himself, guarding his face and chest, but the force of the blasts are still strong enough to knock the air out of him. He barely stops himself from falling, stumbling a few steps back instead. I've got you working up a sweat, I guess, Izuku says as the smoke clears, dodging the right hook Koch-chan throws. He uses the proximity to knee Koch-chan into crotch again, and Koch-chan jerks out of the way, hissing. Again with the hacking ball shot, Koch-chan grumbles, glaring daggers at Izuku. Can't you come up with anything else? Izuku shrugs, throwing a lazy kick that he knows Koch-chan will block. He uses it to move close again, out of Koch-chan's kicking range. I have a couple of ideas, Izuku says as Koch-chan punches at him, just like he expected. Izuku grabs Koch-chan's wrist and tugs his arm in, sinking his teeth into the meat of his forearm, just enough to taste blood. He pulls away as Koch-chan's hand starts exploding by his ear, and Izuku can't hear his own laughing over the ringing in his ears, but it's worth it. God, what the heck, Deku? Koch-chan screams, reaching at him with a sparking palm. Izuku giggles, dodging and elbowing Koch-chan again. You're the one who called me an animal earlier. He shouts back, feeling a drop of sweat run down the side of his face. It's your fault, he laughs, as Koch-chan snarls at him, sliding out of the way of a punch. Get over here, Deku, Koch-chan yells, his palms crackling and popping as he charges forward, exploding his hands in Izuku's face. The impact makes Izuku dizzy, but he doesn't let it distract him as he sweeps Koch-chan's feet, making the man stumble but not fall. Izuku feels his blood rushing in his ears as he ducks in to slam his fist into Koch-chan's stomach, just below the ribs. Koch-chan coughs, sputtering, and Izuku uses the chance to grab Koch-chan's head and slam his chin down into Izuku's knee. Izuku hears Koch-chan's teeth clack together loudly, and he bites his lip in sympathy. Koch-chan blinks for a moment, like he's surprised, then he explodes, the smoke and light blinding Izuku for a second. He feels a warm hand wrap itself in the fabric of his uniform, and another grab his side, then he's flying, flipped over Koch-chan's shoulder. Izuku feels his breath leave him in a rush as his back slams into the ground, and he looks up at Koch-chan, at the wide grin on his face and the smoke clearing around them, and Izuku grins back, trying to sit up. He blinks in surprise when he realizes his limbs aren't responding to him, his arms and legs just shaking. He watches Koch-chan's face twitch, his brows furrow slightly. Get up, Deku, Koch-chan says, nudging Izuku's side with his foot. There's no weight behind it, and Izuku swallows, twisting on the ground, trying to get up. He can't, and the sky above him is twisting and mixing with Koch-chan's face in his vision. Midoriya Midnight asks from the side of the ring, can you move? Izuku replies, eloquently. He strains, pressing his arms into the ground behind him, and trying to lift himself up. I don't. He lifts himself up about an inch off of the ground, then falls back down, his exhausted muscles giving out. I don't think so, he replies, blinking up at Koch-chan. Koch-chan's face is still hovering over his usual scowl painted on his lips. He's blurry, though, and Izuku struggles to focus on him. The match is over. Present Mix shouts. Midoriya is unable to move. Bakugo wins first place. The audience erupts in cheers around them, and Izuku smiles up at Koch-chan, who narrows his eyes at him. That was fun, wasn't it, Koch-chan? Izuku asks, something fuzzy and fizzy bubbling in his head. He giggles, watching Koch-chan's eyes narrow. Koch-chan huffs a loud sigh, then holds out his hand. The skin there is scuffed from explosions, scraped up and bruised. Izuku stares at it. Take my hacking hand, Deku, Koch-chan growls, shaking it in air. Izuku blinks, reaching up a hand and gripping Koch-chan's. Koch-chan hauls him up, pulling him to his feet, and Izuku sways with the motion, blinking as black fuzzies fill his vision. We haven't held hands like this since we were kids, Izuku says, his voice slurring. Koch-chan frowns, grabbing onto his shoulders and holding him up as his legs buckle underneath him. Oops. Izuku giggles. I can't stand. He leans into Koch-chan. You're all cool. Like, temperature-wise. Yeah, because you're running a hacking fever, Koch-chan says, voice a low rumble. Oi, Deku, did I give you a concussion? Probably, Izuku replies, shrugging. I'm gonna pass out, by the way. Don't you hacking dare, Deku, Koch-chan growls. Why the heck do you have a fever? SHH, Izuku says. It's a secret. Koch-chan narrows his eyes at him, then whispers, I thought you couldn't use your quirk in combat. He seems angry, his red eyes narrowed. Can't, Izuku confirms, letting his eyes slide shut. Use it between events. What the heck, Deku, don't pass out, explain yourself. Koch-chan gives him a shake, but Izuku just groans, shaking his head. The world is melting into a liquid mess of colors, and he can't process what Koch-chan is asking him to do. Tired, he mumbles, and Koch-chan sighs. Izuku feels a strong arm slide under his legs and lift him. He vaguely processes that, hey, Koch-chan is carrying me. Before he loses consciousness. Izuku blinks his eyes open in the cool light of the infirmary. For a moment he's confused, wondering why he's tucked under a thin sheet, and why he can hear the soft noise of chatter outside. But then he refocuses, and his brain reminds him about his fight with Koch-chan. He blinks at the ceiling, then slides his gaze to the side. Koch-chan is in a chair by his bedside, his arms folded over his chest and his head tilted to the side, his cheek pillowed on his shoulder. His eyes are shut, and there are thin streaks of ash on his face where it hadn't been cleaned off. His chest rises and falls slowly in his sleep. Izuku blinks, then looks to the side at a blur of motion in his peripheral vision. Araka is waving at him, with Todoroki next to her. He stares at Izuku for a second, then waves one hand. Izuku smiles. How long has he been asleep? He whispers, jerking his head at Koch-chan. Araka giggles silently. Since he got healed, basically she whispers back at him. He said he wasn't leaving you alone until he got an explanation. She shakes her head, rolling her eyes. It didn't really make any sense. He also wants to keep fighting. Are you okay? Todoroki asks. You're still sick. He watches Izuku, even when Araka nudges him and presses a finger to her lips, quietly shushing him. I'm okay, Izuku replies, then looks over to Koch-chan, reaching out a hand to rest on Koch-chan's shoulder. It's warm, even through his uniform. Koch-chan, he says, softly. Wake up. Koch-chan shifts, his eyes fluttering open. The peaceful look on his face lasts for only a few more seconds, before his eyes snap up to Izuku's, and his face twists into a snarl. He reaches forward, grabbing the front of Izuku's shirt. Hecking Deku, he snarls, yanking Izuku forward. I want a goddamn rematch. Izuku blinks, holding up his hands in surrender. You beat me, though? Izuku asks, blinking in surprise as Araka mouths something that looks suspiciously like I told you so from behind Koch-chan. Yeah, and it doesn't hacking count, Koch-chan snarls, his breath hot on Izuku's face. I don't want to beat you because you're sick, I want to beat you because I hacking beat you. Izuku blinks, then sighs. You would have beat me either way, Izuku says, wrapping one of his hands over Koch-chan's wrist. Can you please put me down? Hacking fine, Koch-chan says, dropping him. But we're talking about this later. In private, he says, eyes pointedly moving to glare at Todoroki and Araka. Izuku swallows nervously. Sure, he says, then looks at Araka and stage whispers to her, please help me, boy. Koch-chan shouts, kicking one of the legs of the bed loudly. I hacking heard that, acid. Izuku stands on the second place riser, his legs shaking. The audience is loud around him, their cheers burning the tips of his ears, and making him feel like he's made of jello. It doesn't help that Koch-chan keeps setting off explosions on the first place spot next to him, raising his hands into the air, and firing off large blasts while cackling. Each other sends the audience into a new uproar, and Izuku is more than ready for it to be over. Can we leave yet? He asks, glancing up at Koch-chan, who ignores him. The shiny gold medal hanging around his neck bobs and bounces as he jumps up, exploding the air around him. Izuku winces. He would very much like to not have people looking at him on live television right now, actually. I think so, Izuku blinks, leaning forward to see Todoroki looking at him from the third place riser. Next to him, Monoma is standing with his arms folded over his chest. They're wearing matching bronze medals, and Izuku reaches up to fiddle with the silver one hanging from his own neck. The medal is smooth and cool under his fingers. I'm quite over this whole ordeal myself, Monoma says, stepping off of the third place riser. It was fun until Blasty decided to make his own fireworks. He rolls his eyes, and Izuku blinks, hopping down off of his own riser. I thought you hated me, he says, letting it slip out before he can think better of it. Monoma raises an eyebrow at him, his lips quirking up into a slight smirk. Was I too obvious? He says, meeting Izuku's gaze. I don't hate you specifically, you know. I just don't like Wana and all of your stuck-up attitudes. We're not stuck-up, Todoroki says, and Monoma turns, glaring at him. Are you kidding? You're one of the worst, he says, sneering. He looks back over to Izuku. Let's walk, he says, starting toward one of the exit tunnels. I don't know about you, but my ears are starting to hurt. Izuku nods, following after him. He can barely make out the sound of Todoroki's footsteps behind them, mostly covered by the blast still sounding from the arena. There's something odd about walking back into the tunnels like this, something uncomfortable about it. It makes Izuku feel like he's going to have to do this all again, even though he's not going to reset. Monoma stops in the dark of the tunnel, turning to face Izuku. Izuku and Todoroki both pause, too, and Monoma's eyes narrow when they look at Todoroki. Leave, Todoroki, Monoma says, voice low and commanding. I want to speak with Midoriya alone. He slides his hands into his pockets, staring Todoroki down. Todoroki glances over to Izuku, his face neutral. Are you okay with that? He asks, and Izuku blinks. Yeah, Izuku says, because he can't imagine Monoma is going to say anything worse to him now than he did during their fight, the fight that only Izuku gets to remember. Plus, if worst comes to worst, Izuku knows for a fact he can take Monoma in a fight. Alright, Todoroki says, turning to walk past Monoma, through the door and into the hallway. Izuku watches the door fall shut behind him. Monoma sighs, meeting Izuku's gaze with blue-gray eyes. Midoriya, Monoma says. I want to make something clear. During the cavalry battle, I implied that I disliked you because of your quirkless status. Izuku blinks, and Monoma presses on. I want to make it clear that I dislike you for being in class 1 and generally being annoying, not because of your lack of a quirk. Izuku squints at him. But you still dislike me, Monoma rolls his eyes. Of course I still dislike you. You're in class 1A, he says, his lip curling up like he smelled something rotten. I hate all of you. Okay, Izuku says. Can I go now? I'm not done yet, Monoma says, sighing. Listen, I want you to swear not to tell anybody about what I'm about to tell you. Izuku frowns. I swear. He swallows nervously as Monoma meets his gaze. My younger sister is quirkless, Monoma says, biting at his lower lip for just a moment before stopping and glancing off to the side. So I wanted you to know I don't actually have a problem with quirkless people. And I suppose I wanted to apologize for using that against you. Izuku blinks. Oh, he says, shifting nervously on his feet. It's okay. Monoma sighs, looking at him again. Do you have the extra toe joint? Monoma asks, and Izuku remembers this from their fight, from the fight that got erased. No, Izuku says, shaking his head. He knows what's coming next, but he still doesn't want to hear it. I can tell if someone has a quirk or not when I use mine on them, Monoma says, holding a hand out. If you'd like, I could tell you whether you're truly quirkless or not. Izuku shakes his head. No. He doesn't have to think about it. No? Monoma tips his head slightly, dropping his hand. I would have thought you'd want to know. He sounds different than during their fight, calmer. Like he really doesn't mean any harm in it. Izuku supposes that if he didn't already know the answer, didn't already know about his quirk, it might be something he had to think about, but it doesn't matter, does it? Izuku holds his hands out, looking down at them. I'm still functionally quirkless. Still legally quirkless. Even if I had a quirk, it wouldn't change anything. He smiles slightly. I think it'd be worse, actually. Because then wouldn't it be my own fault that I'm useless? He watches a look of surprise and horror pass over Monoma's face for just a moment. Quirkless people aren't useless, Monoma says, narrowing his eyes at Izuku. Whatever. I'm finished. He turns, putting a hand on the door handle, but Izuku speaks before he leaves. Monoma. The boy pauses, hand already turning the handle to the door. If we'd been matched up in the tournament, would you have copied my quirk? Izuku has to know. To see if I had one. Monoma shakes his head, looking over his shoulder at Izuku. I wouldn't do it without asking, no. It's not like it'd help me beat you in combat if you don't know what it is at this point, yeah. His eyes flit over Izuku's face. Why? No reason, Izuku says, smiling. See you at school. Monoma snorts. As if I'd be caught dead with one of you class 1 rats, he says as he opens the door and steps out of the tunnel, leaving Izuku alone. Izuku sees it on the news the night after the sports festival. He's in his bed, curled up under the covers in clean pajamas, his eyes drooping from exhaustion, and he opens his news app, just to have something to read before bed. His stomach is still unhappy with him, and he's sore all over from the fights, but when he reads the headline, he sits up straight, a chill running down his spine. Ida, he breathes, reading it over and over again. Pro-hero Ingenium in critical condition after attack by hero killer Stain. There are countless articles over the same topic, with headlines that mean the same thing but have been reworded. Izuku peels himself out of bed, stumbling to the bathroom just in time to lean over the toilet and throw up the remains of his dinner, the sharp taste of stomach acid burning his throat. He squeezes his eyes shut for a moment, panting, then rips off a wad of toilet paper, and wipes his face with a shaking hand. Iida's older brother, he thinks. Iida had been missing, at the end of the festival, and I didn't even ask after him. Izuku drops the toilet paper in the toilet and opens his phone, scrolling through one of the articles. He feels his breath catch in his throat when he notices the time of the attack. It was around 2 p.m., when the second round tournament fights would have been taking place. Izuku could have done something, if he'd known. He could have reset and warned someone. His hands start to shake, and he drops his phone on the floor. His vision blurs, and he leans over the toilet, the tile floor digging into his bare knees as he retches. I should have known, he thinks, forcing himself to stand, legs shaking. I should have done something. He flushes the toilet and stumbles back to his room, leaving the phone on the floor. I can still try. It's easy to take his knives out of their box. It's easy to sit on his bed, hands shaking, and cut himself open. It's easier than beating Todoroki was or losing to Koch-chan was. It's easier than reading those articles. It's easier than thinking about how Izuku lived that day over and over, went through that day multiple times, and still didn't take the time to notice this. How he died over and over for his stupid pride, but didn't die to save his friend's brother. He's dying for that now, at least. It feels foggy and good in a way nothing else does to bleed out, and even though the pounding in his head gets worse near the end, he's okay with it. He wakes up in his bed, bundled under the covers, with the phone in his hand, and a pounding headache that makes his vision blur, makes his ears ring. Izuku throws himself out of bed again, running to the bathroom, and this time when he vomits into the toilet, it's tinged dark red with blood, mixing into the catsuit his mom had made for him. Izuku doesn't bother trying to get up. He crouches on the bathroom floor and grips his hands on the toilet seat, shaking with the effort of holding himself up. It's too late, is all he can think, over and over again. It's too late. He doesn't know how long he sits there on the bathroom floor, his stomach burning and his bones aching, deep within him in a way that they haven't since the USJ. But eventually he lurches to his feet, flushing the toilet. His skin looks pale in the moonlight filtering through the window when he turns the tap on and washes his hands, using water and a hand towel to scrub the drying blood and vomit from his cheek. His hands don't seem to want to listen to him, twitching oddly and prickling like they're asleep, but he manages to clean himself up before he stumbles back to his room, throwing himself into his bed. His head is aching, pounding and burning with every movement he makes, and every tiny sound in the room, but he makes himself fish his phone out from the mess of blankets, makes himself open his text messages, and type out a message to Ida and another to Araka. He can't keep his eyes open to wait for a reply, can't stay awake that long, but it's something. Izuku falls asleep with his heartbeat pounding too fast in his temples and his stomach a fiery hot stone in his belly. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Bye-bye, everyone.